The eyes of the young man suddenly opened from a terrible realization. On his knees on the floor, shirtless and clutching his head, he wondered if this was reincarnation, and images of a magical sword and a powerful sphere flickered in his mind, and pondering his favorite game, he decided to find the answer. It was a world familiar to him, a fantasy about swords, magic, and romance. He was reborn in his favorite game, Dungeon Brave Soul, and his new life was to begin in front of the Grand Academy. On April 5th, in the 101st year of the Slayers, crowds of new students gathered in front of the academy for the entrance ceremony day. But the whole world fit on one screen. In another reality, the boy with headphones joyfully clenched his fist. He was preparing for his 40-second playthrough, and on the screen, the game characters were chatting, and one of them confessed that she was afraid of the exam results. He was drinking, completely absorbed in the game. No matter how many times he played, he never got tired. This game, Dambear, was the only reason he could endure the exhausting dullness of his workplace. What distinguished the game from an ordinary RPG was the ability to get closer to the heroines and become their lover, because of which the main character often blushed and found himself surrounded by girls. The game reached a decisive moment. In a magnificent hall, the instructor stepped forward to announce the best performers of the entrance exam, and the students held their breath and watched without taking their eyes away for a moment. He leaned closer to the screen, his heart pounding with anticipation of the party that, as he knew, was about to happen. He sat in a cluttered room, surrounded by snack bags and empty cans, and knew that this announcement would introduce the four main people of the story. And on the screen, as if under a spotlight, the first two appeared: Shell Urani's 5th place in the exam, a mage, and Nagisa Isekai 4th place, a swordsman. The game's introduction continues, and another heroine steps onto the stage, Aerith Centria, who took 3rd place in the entrance exam and sets off on a journey as a cleric. Following her is the game's main character, Leon Prize, the best student of his class, a swordsman mage by profession and a descendant of a legendary hero. The heart of the plot is to lead Leon, build relationships with the heroines, and ultimately confront the Demon King. Beyond this main storyline, the world is filled with a huge number of side quests and events, and although most of them are known, rumors whisper about yet undiscovered secrets, so exploration becomes a key part of the adventure. The captivated gamer admires the stunning graphics and how the heroine's appearance changes as the plot develops, but he knows the real reason for the game's insane popularity is something else entirely. Thing is, the game was classified as adult only. He smiles, the controller rattles in his hands, when he realizes that the game allows the player to build a hair strand. Although the romantic episodes in the game are not always passionate, the process of getting closer to the heroines is often shown in such a way that the heart simply melts. The incredibly successful game was turned into an anime, manga, and a bunch of fan merchandise. They even released an all-ages version where the more explicit content was removed. Players were thrilled by the perfect combination of serious role-playing mechanics and adult romantic themes. Back in his room, among cans of energy drinks and fan merch, the gamer grimaced in pain. He had stayed up late, but fatigue momentarily recedes as he gestures broadly at the shelves filled with figurines and exclaims that, of course, all of this is his. But his energy fades as quickly as it appeared. He collapses at the desk, freezes staring at the game, bitterly thinking that although he gave everything, he never reached this part of the plot, and exhaustion completely overwhelms him. He sprawled on a pillow on the floor, his head and shoulders hidden under a low table cluttered with remnants of his gaming session. Completely exhausted, he closed his eyes and decided to take a short nap. A young man with dark hair and a long flowing coat stands in front of a decorated building, hands in pockets, and throws a question with obvious disdain. Which game do you not like? The narrative immerses into Dungeon Brave Soul 2. In the sequel, the nameless character from the first part, Xenon, becomes the new main hero, and the action takes place after Leon has already sealed the Demon King. He continues, the player takes on the role of this new character, Xenon. In the game's plot, Xenon approaches Leon and the heroines, becomes an annoying friend, and together with them forms a team. But gradually everything begins to change. The heroines one by one distance themselves from Leon, leaving him increasingly lonely. The reason for their abandonment becomes terribly clear. Xenon systematically kidnapped the heroines and now sits with a cruel, victorious smile on a pile of fallen young women. Leon remains completely alone, cornered and forced to watch as Xenon, with a predatory smile, rapes one of the heroines. He showed horror, his face shattered from shock, and the young woman screamed in pain. The hero's composure finally broke. He screams hoarsely from despair, begging for the torment to stop. The desperate plea goes unanswered. Leon reaches out his hand. Tears flow down his face, but in his eyes appears a new, desperate determination as dark energy begins to swirl around him. Driven to complete despair, he tears off the Demon King's seal. Great chains break, and Leon walks alone into the gaping maw of the dark sky. The consequence of this last desperate act is final. The world disappears in a blinding, catastrophic explosion. This is the story's finale, a touching tale of love and adventure turned into a dark and grotesque game, and that is why the young man also despises Den Beret and vows never to get involved with it again. Turbulent thoughts subside as he feels something new. His hand reaches out to touch a cool or neatly patterned surface. He opens his eyes, confusion in his head. Where is he? This is not his room. Looking down, he shudders, a slender, muscular torso, and it is not his. His gaze runs around, confirming confusion. Before him is an incredibly luxurious and spacious room he has never seen before. He approaches the large gilded mirror on the far wall. His reflection slowly appears. When the image suddenly becomes clear, he freezes. The face looking back shocks him. His mind refuses to accept what he sees. He does not believe his eyes and does not recognize in the reflection that stern, dark-haired man. A terrible realization overwhelms him. He grabs his head and shouts the name of the person he hates most in Dambor, Zenon Baskerville. He falls to his knees, shirtless, drenched in sweat. His hands dig into his hair, and the world seems to crumble around him. One desperate question screams in his head: what is happening? The terrible truth covers him, cold and undeniable. Now this is a story, the story of a man reborn not as a hero, but as the very villain he despised in his favorite game. His new life has begun, and what will come of it is a dreadful unknown. The young man sharply inhales and wakes up, sweat running down his forehead. He freezes before the luxurious mirror with his hands pressed to the glass, and a terrible thought crashes down on him. The face in it belongs to Zenon Baskerville, the protagonist of the game Dungeon Brave Soul 2, and the one person in that world he hates above all. Suddenly memories of his previous life flood in. He was a gamer in a cluttered room, the controller and headphones thrown aside because he decided to take a nap, and he clutches his head in disbelief, asking himself why, of all options, he was destined to be reborn as this man. He recalls that Zenon had a reputation as a womanizer, a criminal of the highest order, and wonders what terrible deeds he must have committed in his past life to be cursed with such a reincarnation. Diving into despair, he mourns his fate. If he had to be reborn, he would infinitely wish to become a true hero of the story, Leon, who is always surrounded by loyal comrades. Suddenly, the sound of an opening door cuts through his thoughts. A young maid enters the room with a pile of fresh linen. Seeing that he has woken up, she shudders and immediately apologizes for entering without permission. He looks at her intently and sharply asks who she is. This deeply shook both. Her voice trembled as she explained that she knocked, but when he did not wake, she had no choice but to enter, and she begged him to forgive her rudeness and untidy appearance, swearing to accept any punishment. He jumped back in complete shock. The thought of punishment for such a trifle was absolutely foreign to him, and her frightened submission deeply shook him. The poor maid returned, showed her back, and said she was ready for the usual punishment. The pale scars on her skin made him shudder, and with growing horror he realized that the real Zenon probably abused her daily. Inside him a battle raged. A dark impulse, like a reminder of Zenon's nature, urged him to hit her, but he restrained himself, said he would not punish her, and ordered her to dress to sound more convincing. He added a threat. The usual Zenon would have hit her at least 10 times for this, so it was not worth making him repeat himself, and the frightened maid instantly agreed. While the maid waited outside, he lifted the dark shirt and noticed that Zenon's clothes were almost all black, just the wardrobe for a thief, which he had now become. He stood in the luxurious bedroom and watched the maid. He could not help but notice her beauty, a strange fact for someone he considered a minor character, and this beauty became a landmark in this new reality. He asked her what year, month, and day it was now. She nervously replied, April 5, year 101 according to the Slayer calendar, and this date confirmed his fears and suspicions. This was undoubtedly the world of Dambor. This date seemed extremely important to him. April 5, the day of the entrance ceremony at the Royal Academy of Sword and Magic in the capital. For him, a player who had completed the game to the very end, it was an unforgettable day. Realizing this, he decided to go to the academy immediately, but the maid interrupted his thoughts and asked if he was not going to miss the morning training, and this question completely caught him off guard. He froze in surprise and questioned her assumption. She explained that he trained every morning without fail at the same time, and this revelation stunned him. He had never suspected that the original Zenon had such a hardworking side, which was not shown at all in the game. Seeing his hesitation, she quietly offered to prepare breakfast if he was going to take a break, and he, not wanting to break the habit, replied that he would train as usual and asked her to lead him to the training ground. She led him outside through the estate until they found themselves in an abandoned, ruined courtyard. He froze at the sight. Collapsed columns and overgrown weeds made it hard to believe that this could really be Xenon's training place. He grabbed a sword from the stand nearby. The weight of the sword felt strangely familiar in his hand. When he gripped the hilt, a deep connection passed through him. He was gradually getting used to Xenon's body. The movements felt so natural, as if they belonged to him from birth. His gaze fell on a row of battered training logs. Although he knew little about martial arts, he knew that physical strength was not a gift but the result of relentless work. So, focusing his will, he summoned a vortex of dark energy in his palm and created a dark blade. From his palm exploded a blade of pure darkness and struck the target with destructive force. The post instantly shattered in a harsh explosion of shadow and wood splinters. But he was tormented by contradictions. The real Xenon was a hardworking man who mastered advanced dark magic yet was famous for stealing other men's wives. Why remained a mystery, but he knew. As long as he lived in this body, he needed to understand who Xenon really was. Suddenly it dawned on him. He did not dislike Xenon only because of his reputation as a ladies' man, but now, in this timeline, it was the day of the entrance ceremony at school before the events of the first game. Xenon had not yet seduced anyone, so at this moment there was no reason not to like him. This new perspective opened up a whole world of possibilities before him. He could lead a peaceful school life, avoid the romantic entanglements of the second game, depending on his actions, even help the main hero defeat the Demon King, or simply stay out of it. His dreams were interrupted by a maid with a basin of water. He immediately apologized and acknowledged her as the mistress of the house. Simple words of thanks made the maid freeze in place. The basin quietly clanged. He asked why she had become like stone. Leviana was inwardly confused. She could not believe that Xenon himself was thanking her. It was a stunning turn, and she tried with all her might to compose herself. He looked her straight in the eyes and said he had always been grateful for her devotion but was too shy to admit it. Leviana could only meet his gaze, completely speechless. Her heart pounded as he continued, promising to truly appreciate her from now on because he was happy because of her support. She absorbed his words and he silently made a promise to himself. Not to become a villain like the original Xenon, better to change his heart now while he still could. This kindness proved too strong for Leviana. She burst into tears of pure joy and exclaimed that this was the best day of her life because her devotion was finally rewarded. He, stunned by her strong reaction, admitted that it was his fault for not thanking her earlier and promised to rely on her from now on, and she gladly agreed through her tears. When their emotional conversation ended, he sat in a luxurious carriage. Leviana waved to him through tears, begging him to take care of himself. And settling inside, he thought that the daily cruelty of that Xenon must have been so terrible that a simple thank you could provoke such a strong reaction. Her cries chased after the departing carriage. She begged the young master to return alive and unharmed, and he looked back from the window with slight irritation and grumbled for her to just go away. Finally alone in the moving carriage, he sighed quietly, leaned forward, clasped his hands, and focused on the crucial question: how far should he follow the original game's script? He recalled the chronology of the original story. The main hero, Leon Brave, was destined to take 2 years with the support of the heroines to defeat the Demon King, and this grand trial was to begin today during the school entrance ceremony. Listening to his feelings, he realized he would not follow that path. He sincerely believed in pure love and would not allow the hero to be betrayed, and even more so would not become the one who stole someone's love. This raised a crucial question. As just a classmate, how much could he interfere in the main story at all? He recalled the grim ending of the sequel Dambore 2. In that timeline, Leon successfully sealed the Demon King, but Xenon stole the heroine. This betrayal pushed the desperate hero to resurrect the very evil he sought to defeat. This resurrection turned into a disaster. The Demon King's magic, unleashed, wiped the royal capital and everyone in it off the face of the earth, a truly devastating end. He decided that if Xenon's actions really were that push, then the solution was simple. Just stop stealing heroines, stay aside, and wait for Leon to defeat the Demon Lord, completely ignoring the game's scenario for his character. Having decided, an unwavering determination played on his face. He would not follow Xenon's path. The choice was made, and he would create a fate completely different from that defined by the game. Under the elegant arch inscribed with Royal Academy of Sword Magic, a new class of students solemnly ascends the stairs, their silhouettes looking tiny against the backdrop of that magnificent building awaiting them. Among them, a young man trembles with barely restrained excitement. He understands that he has finally entered the very academy where the game Brave Soul took place. A resolute gleam burns in his eyes, and he gathers strength to enter. The academy grounds are simply a breathtaking sight, a sprawling campus with majestic architecture around a grand domed hall, and the main square filled with crowds of students, a sea of new faces ready to begin their journey. As he walks among them, a blush creeps across his face, and he reproaches himself for nervousness, considering it pathetic for someone who has already walked those same school grounds so many times in the game. He covered his face with his hand, trying to compose himself. He manages to calm down, but it takes effort. A fragile moment of silence is broken by a sharp step nearby. A girl passes by, and he flinches. His thoughts instantly jump to the future, the entrance ceremony, orientation, and then that legendary party where the hero Leon will meet the heroines. At this thought, an ominous chuckle escaped him, causing a group of girls nearby to scream in fear, and he froze, horrified to realize they were afraid of him. His face contorts into a wide maniacal smile, an expression he seemingly does not even realize. As he turns, two more female students see him and step back, their faces pale with horror. The frightened girls hurriedly run away, one confessing to the other that it is her fault. The young man watches them leave, walks alone, and quietly decides that from now on he will not laugh in front of people. Peter sat alone in the huge hall and felt a piercing sting of loneliness, but instantly pushed it away, reminding himself who he was. Zenon Baskerville, a cruel villain, and disdainfully brushed off the thought, insisting he was not lonely, even when completely alone. His gloomy thoughts are shattered by a voice from the stage. An elderly official announces that it is time to name the best students of the entrance exam, and Zenon sharply raises his head. Attention is captured. He silently watched as the best entrance exam results began to be announced. The director's voice named fifth place Shell Uranus, and she stood up from her seat, quietly accepting this honor. She is the daughter of a local nobleman from the borderlands and a childhood friend of the main character Leon. It was Shell who pushed him to enter this academy, and she herself initially acts as a mage who stays in the rear and specializes in offensive magic. The announcements continued. Fourth place Nagisa Shikai. Zenon's heart trembled because he recognized another key figure described as lively, inquisitive, and energetic. She hails from an eastern country with a Japanese-style culture, the daughter of a dojo master and a true samurai. Initially, she is a swordswoman wielding a katana with such speed that surpasses even Leon. Zenon recalled that darkness lives in her heart, and helping her speak it is the key to her story. Next was third Aerith Centria, daughter of central nobility, but her father turned out to be a criminal, which caused her to grow up strangely. Initially, she was a clericopath influenced by the fact that her parents ran the church, and Zenon could not help but admire her well-proportioned figure, mentally calling her the goddess of breasts. He remembered her fate in the game, a miserable victim, broken both in body and spirit by Zenon himself, and decided that such a future would no longer be. At that moment, the director's voice thundered through the hall, announcing the Academy Prize winner. Second place Zenon Baskerville. He felt dizzy. All the main heroines were so cute, and he felt an irresistible desire to somehow connect with them, and a nervous giggle escaped as he tried to comprehend this. The director's voice snapped him out of his dreams, sharp and authoritative. Zenon Baskerville shuddered and sharply turned to the president. He raised his eyes and saw that all eyes in the hall were fixed on him. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead, and suddenly realization struck with full force. He missed his chance to stand up. Whispers exploded among the students. Everyone knew the name Baskerville, this sinister noble twin family, about whom they whisper as if it had killed the previous king and conspired with a neighboring country. Panic surged in Zenon. This was the worst attention imaginable, and then the director addressed him directly. Although his high exam results were worthy of praise, in the academy nobles and commoners are treated equally, and disrespect, even from a family of marquises, is not forgiven here. He remained seated. Panic flashed in his mind when he realized he would not manage to stand up in time. His mind raced, weighing options. Standing up now would be pathetic, and any careless embarrassment could turn into mockery. So he clung to his plan with a bold smile and announced that he apologized for the rudeness and would take the director's advice into account, but deliberately would not stand up. His bold statement caused stunned, absolute silence among all the students. Amid the silent crowd, the heroines watch tensely and attentively as the confrontation unfolds. The director's fists turned white, gripping the podium. He felt Zenon's audacious tone but coldly confirmed that everything was clear to him. Zenon was not going to change his rebellious attitude. His audacity was only a mask beneath which an inner storm raged. He panicked, realizing he had already apologized. Although he seemed like a villain, in reality he was a good person. The director cleared his throat and, considering the festive mood, decided not to raise the issue for now, but sternly warned, if there is no improvement later there will be consequences, and Zenon just stood in shock. While the ceremony continued, Zenon bit himself for the poor choice of moment. He still was not used to the new name. Then the director announced the best first place in the entrance exams and class president, Leon Brave. Only one student stood up. It was Leon Brave, the son of the hero, who possessed the power to seal the Demon King, the only protagonist of the game. Although a commoner, he was the best student and a favorite of many heroines, and his first profession was Rune Knight, a rare class combining melee combat with magic. His appearance struck Zenon, the very main hero, whose role he had so often taken, stood right before him. He noticed Leon with a stern expression looking in his direction and wondered whether he was looking at him with hatred, although he did not recall doing anything that could make him hated. Sitting, he watches as Leon Praise is asked to deliver greetings on behalf of the new students, and Leon calmly agrees. Leon begins the speech, and Zenon is surprised by his earlier noisy behavior, which annoyed the top student. Leon modestly explains that he was born a commoner in a village and normally would never have had a chance to stand here. He sincerely says that it is a great honor for him to study at the prestigious Royal Academy of Sword and Magic, and thanks the guardians who were like parents to him, as well as the teachers and senior students. He continues, saying that he enrolled to become stronger and protect the country, and although the kingdom of Slayers is peaceful, that does not mean there is no evil worth hating. With a determined look, he swears to fight the evil that torments people, and Zenon in the crowd listens unimpressed. He expected a more pompous statement about becoming a king hero. Leon's voice sounded like a verdict, the final resolute statement. He would fight this evil, even if its source turned out to be a classmate from the same school. These words cause a commotion among the students. They begin whispering to each other, and the sharp silhouette of a comet makes Zenon raise his eyes in surprise. Everything becomes clear instantly. Leon looks at him with a sharp, hostile gaze directed straight at him. Zenon is stunned. Why is he so openly hostile if they have not even done anything to each other? Such unexpected attention did not go unnoticed by others. A hypothesis began to form. In the first game, Zenon was just a minor simpleton from the group of targets. But now, it seems, the world's settings have been reshaped. He suddenly became the villain in the leading role with a biography that never existed, and that is why Leon was already so openly hostile to him, even though he did nothing to deserve it. If this is true, the future became terribly uncertain. The Demon King could defeat Leon and destroy the world, and there was no longer any guarantee that the hero, as planned, would achieve victory and bring a happy ending. Meanwhile, the ceremony at the academy ended. The students were asked to proceed to their classes, and amid the rustling crowd, Zenon sat alone with crossed arms, his face expressionless and detached. New reality could make the knowledge from the game useless if everything really changed. He realized that sitting idly and just surviving would no longer work. At first, he planned to do nothing, but now he decided to do his best not to provoke Leon, not to stand in the way of his actions, and to try to lead a peaceful school life. His determination was immediately questioned. From the other end of the classroom, Leon looked at him with undisguised contempt. Zenon felt this piercing gaze and thought that Leon seemed to already accuse him of some wrongdoing. He was looking for a more reliable way to survive, to join Leon and others to help defeat the Demon King. After all, Zenon was considered the strongest character after the Demon King himself and Leon. By ensuring their victory, he could live peacefully at school and save the world from destruction. He understood that staying true to the main script would be difficult. Fighting for a good image of Zenon was even harder, especially under the influence of a certain teacher who nurtured his dark tendencies. He vowed not to let this happen, but the most important question remained. Why did the original Zenon behave that way in the first place? End of the school day, Leon and friends were arranging hangouts and deciding which clubs to check out. Zenon passed by them seemingly indifferent. He was used to the fact that first impressions, formed in seconds, decided everything, and because of his appearance and the family fame of tyrants, his place in society was predetermined. With a single thought, he let them go and rushed home to plan the next steps. Near the academy, a luxurious carriage awaited him, and soon he found himself before a magnificent mansion where he was solemnly greeted at the door. "Welcome back, young gentleman and me." Inside, a maid with 2 buns on her head froze in surprise when his hand reached for her face. Embarrassed, he asked how long she had been waiting, and if she was cold. She bluntly replied that everything was fine and then delivered an urgent message. His master was waiting for him in the office and asked him to appear immediately. He stood by the door, thoughts racing, and the name echoed in his mind, Grandolph Baskerville. Nearby, a hesitant voice asked if he was the young master. Memories of the Lord of the Game surged. Grandolph, his father, was the ruler of the night in the kingdom, the very one who directed Xanon onto the path of evil. He led the underworld, controlled the criminal guild, was a ruthless slave trader and shadow assassin who plunged everything into darkness, and all this information painted the image of a villain without equal. Resigned to the inevitable, he walked down the corridor along the clearing. He knew that no matter what, he could not avoid meeting his father. Reaching the grand doors, he knocked and announced his presence. As soon as he stepped inside, a surge of dark energy burst forth, and a powerful spell, the bloody chain, shot forward and fiercely wrapped around him. Magic struck the ground, leaving him completely bound and helpless on the exquisite carpet while a figure stood over him. He muttered in pain, straining against the shackles, and raising his eyes, a large man in the shadows spoke in a cold voice, saying they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and through the pain, Xenon recognized his father. A man loomed over him, Grandolph Baskerville. He explained that the dark magic, the bloody chain, not only binds but also occasionally causes harm, a true instrument of torture. Then Grandolph casually mentioned that Xenon had taken second place on the entrance exam. Suddenly, with brutal stomping, Grandolph pressed him to the floor and exploded with bitterness. How could Xenon not even take first place in a small academy? Was he really the eldest son? Roaring that the basketball family was a lineage of the strong who ruled at night, and one of them had to be the strongest. He accused his son of selling out the family pride, called him a fool, and said he would not be allowed to suffer any defeat. Randolph sneered contemptuously and called Xenon a pathetic son for being unable to do anything against such a trifle, then issued an ultimatum. If Xenon does not take first place in the next exam, it is not the end. He said he was leaving for work and ordered to obey the overseers and not skip training. After the father left, Xenon, beaten and bleeding, stumbled out of the room. Two maids rushed to him in fear. One shouted his name, the other begged him to hold on and promised to start treatment immediately. He lay in bed. The maid was treating the wounds from his father's attack, and as she carefully applied the potion, he noticed with surprise that the terrible bodily injuries were already beginning to disappear, while outside the majestic estate stood silently against the backdrop of the night sky. When he looked down, he saw that the maid Leviana had fallen asleep on his chest, completely exhausted after all her attempts to save him. He watched her sleep, while a storm of thoughts raged in his mind. He could not believe that someone would so cruelly torment their own son. The very memory hurt, and he did not understand why someone as good as her was wasted, forced to serve a depraved scoundrel like that same Xenon, who steals other people's lovers. His attention sharpened on the real cause. He knew without a doubt that behind Anon's madness and why he turned so far from any righteous path stood one person, Grandolph Baskerville. The realization exploded in an avalanche of memories in Xenon. Daily abuse had accumulated into an unbearable burden that eventually broke his mind, and this breakdown directly led to the cruel setup of the hero Leon and, in a certain sense, took away the hero himself from him. The memories painted a sharp contrast. Leon, the hero revered by all, had everything Xenon lacked. He was from a noble family, the favorite of many girls and top of the class. Xenon, however, was born into a closed and cruel family, despised by classmates. Without his father's love, he endured beatings and humiliation, and in his heart a passionate envy and hatred for Leon, who had everything he so desired, flared up. That is why in his madness Xenon decided to destroy Leon. He was taking away all the heroines who adored him. Back in the present, he felt the weight of this inherited past crash down on him. His face hardened, his hand clenched into a firm fist. He decided to set a goal for himself in this world. His new goal became clear. First, he needed to defeat one person, even before the Demon King. Now he had a clear goal to defeat Grandolph. That man, he swore, had no right to exist. He was his implacable enemy. Clenching his fist, his eyes blaze with a new fire, and he decides that having been reborn, he will live freely and enjoy this world, rejecting both the script written by the game creators and the will of his tyrannical father. His moment of resolve is suddenly interrupted. Maid Leviana bursts into the room, stumbles, and falls right onto him lying in bed, exclaiming embarrassedly, "Young master." She fell on him and, surprised, grabbed tightly. He froze with wide-open eyes and blushed from the sudden, unexpected embrace. Finally, she understands where they are and lets out a panic scream. This small flash of chaos occurs in a room of the huge, menacing Baskerville estate, silently towering under the starry night sky. Later, when the noise subsides, he sits at the table in his room, illuminated by the morning light, writing carefully and beginning to make a plan. First of all, he wants to verify his knowledge of the game. Taking a pen, he meticulously writes out all the quests and locations, recording everything in Japanese characters. He runs through the upcoming plot twists in his mind and considers how to obtain what he needs. He reasons that writing in Japanese is a necessary precaution that ensures no one in this world can decipher his strategies. Having finished the notes, he pushes them aside, satisfied. The urgent task with the notes is done, but a much more difficult question lies ahead: how to live in this world. His thoughts immediately turn to the main obstacle in his path. To achieve anything, he knows there is only one person he must have underfoot. That man is his father. He considers the option of simply leaving home but rejects it as impossible. His father would surely send assassins after him, and if he strays too far from the original script, he won't be able to predict Leon's actions, so he is trapped. He imagined the best option, hoping that the Demon King would be sealed as foreseen, but the grim reality overshadowed that hope, and his face tightened with anxiety. Everything was at stake. If Leon loses to the Demon King, the whole world will burn in fire and ruin. Lying sleepless in a lavish bed, Zenon Baskerville pondered his new reality. To become stronger, he knew he had to acquire and develop skills. With quiet determination, he spoke the command to review his status. In response, a holographic display suddenly appeared before him in the darkened room, confirming his identity: Zenon Basketball, as well as his job, magical swordsman, swordsmanship skill marked with a value of 20. He carefully studies the information and suddenly realizes his profession is the same as in the game, magical swordsman like Leon, and he is convinced that this world is damnbare. There are no levels here. Power is given only by acquired skills and honing their mastery. The cursor slowly glides over the list of his skills: fencing 20, dark magic 20, training 20. A moment of confusion flashed across his face. He continues to analyze the numbers. It is clear to him why swordsmanship and dark magic have the same ratings, but he is embarrassed by how much his training level has risen. A chill of anxiety crawls down his spine, because he only hopes he won't have to use it. His finger slides along the edge of the display, and he notices its obvious limitations. This does not look like a game status screen. There are no commands for items, settings, saving, or low. The realization hardened his determination to become stronger. He needs to learn new skills and improve mastery. The maximum for combat skills is 50, so there is still plenty of room for growth. He also understands that raising skills to a certain level will open doors to higher classes, and he needs to acquire many items, many of which he has already decided to obtain. Such items provide real enhancement. Powerful weapons and armor increase his base stats, certain things unlock completely new skills and magic, and accessories and talismans that reduce damage. These are what he is also eyeing, concluding that there are things he absolutely must acquire. He thoughtfully considers how to get them. Items can be bought in a shop, found by digging through dungeons, or earned as rewards for completing certain events. Rising from the bed, a final cold thought flashed through his mind. Dungeon items depend on luck and cannot be reliably obtained, and truly rare things are sold only at auctions, and that requires insane money. He stood by the window and looked at his new reality, but he had no intention of strictly following the initial game plot. He knew he must not get in Leon's way, because event items are for the main hero, and if he foolishly took something that caused Leon to lose to the Demon King, it would be the end of the game for everyone. While he pondered this fragile balance, a polite knock sounded at the door of his large, luxurious bedroom, and a voice from the corridor asked for permission to enter. The door suddenly opened, and a maid appeared before him with a breakfast tray. She said she thought he might be unwell, so she brought food directly to the room. Zenon acknowledged with relief that he was already hungry, instantly recognizing the properties of the dishes. The sandwich and soup had a healing effect, and the coffee removed negative states. It was dish he knew as Levi in his command key. Zenon praised her, saying that it looked delicious. The maid was completely flustered by the compliment, insisting that she had done nothing special and was just doing her job, but despite her objections, Zenon looked at her warmly and, as always, thanked her once again. Simple words of thanks turned out to be too strong for her. Zenon calmly drank his coffee. The maid, overwhelmed with emotions, covered her blushing face, and one drop of blood fell from her nose. The surge of emotions caused a sudden nosebleed. Blood splattered on the polished floor. Deeply embarrassed, the maid hurriedly apologized and ran out of the room, promising to return later for the dishes, leaving the stunned observer standing and looking at the traces of her extreme reaction. He sat down to eat again, simultaneously amazed and amused. He could not believe that a simple thank you had caused such a wave of emotions, but he truly liked the maid's deep devotion. Later, in a formal suit, Zenon solemnly walked through the luxurious halls of the mansion. The dignified head butler met him and politely greeted him with "Good morning," and Zenon knew in his mind. His character in this world already had reliable allies, so desperate antics like kidnapping or stealing someone else's woman were completely unnecessary. He addressed the butler by name Zeus and directly asked if he intended to report to his father about his absence from morning practice. Zeus, the head of the servants and the one who manages the mansion, explained his position. He was not there to tattle, he was simply worried that Zenon might be sick. Butler Zeus continued in a serious tone, looking down from the top of the stairs. He said that Zenon's father, the Lord himself, had great hopes for him. He wanted his son to grow strong and worthy of the name of their basketball family, and sincerely hoped that Zenon would not betray this trust. He assures the valet that although he will sometimes take breaks from training, he will ultimately live up to his father's expectations. His expression is firm, but there is still a flicker of defiance in his eyes. He turns and walks away, telling Zeus that a simple wave is not the only path to strength, adding with a confident smile that he will become strong in his own way to surprise his father, and sets off. A week passes at the academy. Zenon's lonely life continues. His threatening figure makes other students whisper. The average-level school program is a trifle for him. The principles of magic come to him effortlessly, and through the class, Leon watches him like a predator, his gaze full of undisguised hostility. In the lecture hall, the teacher announced that today's lesson would be about dungeon exploration, and a sinister smile blossomed on Zenon's face. This was the lesson he had been waiting for, and his anxious excitement made the students nearby recoil in fear. She explains, dungeons are layers of monsters in abundance, real mountains of treasure that continuously provide resources, but also a ticking bomb if left unattended. They will endlessly spew monsters, so the teacher orders everyone to form teams before going out. The academy where they study was created specifically for the extermination of monsters that swarm in these dungeons. Its true purpose, to raise people capable of protecting the lives of others. The students gather in front of a huge stone entrance, the academy's training dungeon, known as the Sage's Playground. The teacher announces that now each group will enter in turn, and Zenon stands ready with his sword drawn. The teacher, noticing that he was alone, asked in surprise why he was without a command. Zenon, placing his hands on his hips, confidently stated that he needed no one and could handle the training dungeon entirely by himself, and this statement left the teacher momentarily speechless. He stood his ground when suddenly another voice cut through the air. A young woman with a long dark ponytail stepped forward and said that she also had no problems. Zenon slightly turned his head and looked at the newcomer. The young woman, Nagisa Sekai, known for initially distrusting others. The teacher, worried, warned that exploring alone is dangerous, especially on the first dungeon expedition, and suggested that they go together. She stood silently and Zenon brushed off the teacher's advice, saying everything was fine and it was unnecessary. However, he had thought everything through in advance so as not to disturb Leon. He had to keep contact with Nagisa to an absolute minimum. She stood next to the teacher, looked at the class with a stern gaze, and said, "Although there are no particularly dangerous monsters in this dungeon, all incidents are their own responsibility, and if someone dies, the academy will not be liable," so she begged them not to take reckless risks. Finally, she said that their performance would be reflected in their grades, and a wave of excitement instantly swept through the crowd of students. The students immediately began to argue, each group demanding to enter first, and Zenon looked with contempt at their impatient glow and thought that the teacher could decide the order herself. Standing aside from the crowd, Nagisa noted that the others behaved carelessly, as if on a walk, and this surprised Zenon. She instantly read on his face he radiated trouble, and when everyone around was scared, there was nothing to be done. Then she asked what he wanted from her, as he seemed the only one idle. Before he could answer, she declared that if no one could decide who would go first, then she, Nagisa Sekai, would take the lead. Zenon froze, stunned, not believing whether she was trying to outdo him. Without uttering a word, she decisively walked past the quarrelsome students. Leon and others shouted that her action was unfair, and Zenon only watched with a smile. Her character seemed unexpected and interesting to him, and he calmly said that he trusted her to decide this. She alone entered the stone passage, face to face with the deep, ominous darkness of the dungeon. Behind her back, the other students were still complaining about her selfishness, and when Zenon's patience ran out, he exploded with anger, barked that their hesitation was a waste of time, and demanded to settle it with rock, paper, scissors or by drawing lots before sunset. His outburst finally worked. Leon Prey announced that it was now their turn, and the rest of the students, though embarrassed, lined up behind him. The teacher watched, surprised, and admitted to herself that she now respected the unexpected leadership of Zenon Baskerville differently. She quickly corrected her assessment and realized the student's detachment from Zenon was most likely due to his frightening appearance and family name, a prejudice she herself admitted to sharing. As their teacher, she felt the need to deeply reflect on his prejudice. Leon questioned Xenon's decision to go last, noting that he didn't even join their game of rock, paper, scissors to determine the order. Xenon narrowed his eyes and replied that he needed to confirm one detail of the arrangement. He glanced at the teacher and directly asked if a tax had to be paid for items and treasures found in Dungeon B. She explained that this was a school activity, there would be no taxes, but warned that the found items were of little value, and although there were no strong monsters in the dungeon, he should retreat if it became dangerous, especially since he was alone, and a smile blossomed on Xenon's face. He sighed with relief and promised to search carefully for items. With a final dismissive wave of his hand, he thanked her for her concern and walked away. The teacher watched him go, considering herself reliable and kind for showing such care. But as soon as he left, a dark memory from the game flashed in Xenon's mind, a vision of the same teacher, beaten and chained in the basement. He clenched his fist in grim determination and promised himself never to let that world become reality. His resolve strengthened, he stood before the gaping maw of the dungeon, ready to face whatever lurked inside. In the stone dungeon, Xenon launches an attack. With a light wrist movement, he summons the Shadow Blade, a barrage of dark, blade-like projectiles rushing forward, while jelly-like slime creatures bounce off and explode upon hitting the floor and walls. Darts fly through the long, cavernous hall, and with a single sword swing, the entire path is cleared of enemies. He freezes, thoughtfully raising his hand to his chin. He recognizes the structure of the dungeon and the items that fell from the fallen slimes, such as the slime core. Everything he notices is exactly like in the game. His suspicions turn out to be true. It is just a training zone, full only of weak mobs and completely without traps, so it can be easily cleared even at a low level. Understanding this, he sets off with new confidence and disdainfully easily deals with the remaining slimes. He considers all this simple work. Picking up another fallen object, he is already thinking about the real trouble, the formidable monster lurking on the lowest floor. Thoughts of the future threat do not distract him from the present. Before him, the room swarms with another horde of slimes. He waved them off with a smirk as if to say, no big deal, and jumped right into their paws. He appeared among them with a mocking smile, sword raised high, sneering at the creatures sparkling with energy around, and declared that they were nothing more than punching bags. Creatures rushed around him, but he only breathes heavily, sweat dripping from his chin, and a satisfied smirk on his face as they are destroyed. A moment, the chaos subsides, the room clears, thin threads of energy dissipate in the air. He stands alone at the top of the grand staircase and decides that it is time to ascend to the next level. He sits wounded, leaning against the stone wall, supported by Leon and Shell. Leon asks if he is hurt, but Xenon can only think about his miserable failure. Even needed help against weak monsters in the first dungeon. This is a memory from the third floor of that dungeon, where the number of dead students was steadily increasing. At that time, only Leon, Shell, and Aegisa were skilled enough to reach the lower lake. He recalled seeing another student who activated a class skill, healed the wounded, and ordered them to line up, while Xenon inwardly smirked, believing that joining forces with such brainless allies would only drag him down. The girl's soothing magic flows easily and effortlessly. Leon sincerely thanks her, and noticing thought as befits a Sagath mana of Eret's century seems to have no limits. Looking at her, Xenon felt an unfamiliar feeling, and his eyes suddenly opened wide from a sudden, anxious vulnerability. He sharply slaps himself in the face, driving the thought away because he understands. If he looked any longer, he would fall in love with her, and that, he thinks, would be a bad end for the resurrection of the Demon King, so he cannot allow himself to become a broken main character, and with fresh determination moves on. Just as he was about to leave, Eric comes straight up to him and asks if he is Baskerville. He nodded in response, called her Kentry, the third student of the academy, while the other students nervously watched with barely noticeable smiles, and confirmed her identity, addressing him as the junior. She offers to heal him, but he waved it off. No need, I don't require it, the dungeon is just a lesson for him, and he asks what she was doing instead of moving forward. Eret looks at him gently and simply explains her actions. She heals everyone because she cannot leave the wounded alone. His thoughts kept returning to her, Eret Cintria, the embodiment of devotion and self-sacrifice, a woman who would give her life for anyone. He recalled moments from the game where she acted exactly like that, asked if she needed to move forward, and she just smiled and explained that she had a friend's permission, because for her it was more important that the whole party reach the goal together, and he really liked her sweet, friendly manner. Her behavior, of course, was worthy of praise, but during the game she always sowed anxiety in him. She belonged to those people who are ready to sacrifice themselves and give up their own happiness for the sake of others. He knew she was not a bad person, but her very nature irritated him. He dismissed this thought as absurd and turned to leave. He decided it was not his business. He would remain silent, let the hero do the scolding. She called out to him, asking if something had happened. Not turning fully, he advised her to continue helping others, but to do so moderately. Then he said he would go ahead. Determination hardened within him. It was not his business to save Aerith, the wounded saint, from her endless cycle of self-sacrifice. That was Leon's role as the villain. All that remained was to make a stylish exit. He returned to the gaping maw of the lower levels of the dungeon, dark stairs descending into the abyss. The descent led him to the 4th floor, where a horde of horned creatures resembling rabbits rushed through the darkness. He calmly wiped his blade, confident that none of his classmates could have come this far, and assumed that Leon, Syl, and Aegisa had most likely already reached the lowest floor. His thoughts drifted to them. He imagined the squad of heroes before a giant shadow beast and mentally decided that Leon had probably already defeated it. He stands in the middle of a field of fallen, smaller monsters, somewhat disappointed with his first dungeon expedition. His thoughts are interrupted by a piercing scream echoing from the depths of the cave. This frightened scream belongs to another student who is panicking and rushing through Nagisa's consciousness, wildly shouting for everyone to retreat, yelling that they will die if they do not move, and Nagisa, hearing true fear in his voice, turns back to the commotion. Her eyes widened as she saw the student running and another girl who had fallen and could not get out. A huge shadow loomed over both of them. It is a gargoyle, a monstrous creature that should only exist on the lowest tier of the dungeon, and now stands before them with outstretched, threatening claws. The student screams in rage upon seeing his classmate. The gargoyle roars, declaring it will kill all humans, and suddenly a blinding light flashes. Leon, having awakened the hero's blood within himself, rushes into battle along with Nagisa and Shell to push back the monster, while from afar Xenon watches and recognizes those fading moments. Suddenly he realizes his memory has failed him. He forgot a key detail. In the game, it was only mentioned in passing that the gargoyle escaped from somewhere, killing several classmates during its flight, and below the hero squad confronts the monster. In another part of the cave, the tragic consequences of the escape become clear. A student holds the body of a classmate and sobs, believing it is his fault he let the enemy escape and thereby doomed his friend to death. His sorrow is cut short when a gargoyle looms over him. Xenon coldly observes and concludes, some minor character doomed to die is about to meet his fate, and he mercilessly decides that this student must be the one killed. When the monster's paw descends, muffling the student's scream, Xenon understands. This sacrifice is necessary. Only then will Leon grow into a hero and be able to stand against the demon race. This death is the needed impetus, and for a moment he wonders if helping would be a mistake. He hesitates between two paths before him. If he intervenes, the future where Leon defeats the Demon King and saves the world might change, and feeling the sadness of the situation, he decides he has no choice but to ignore it. When the students scream in horror, he turns away. He stood still, his fist clenched by his side. Behind him, a desperate exchange of words cut through the noise. One student begged another to run to save himself, but the answer was stubborn. They would never leave a friend behind to flee alone. Consequence of his hesitation burst out in a blinding flash. Two students, one holding the other tightly, screamed as the gargoyle's force lunged at them, a wave of inevitable death. But at the last moment, an explosion thundered not on them but ahead. A figure stood between them and the monster, and the students only froze in stunned silence. The gargoyle howled. Arcs of wild power ran through its body from the unexpected blow. Xenon glared fiercely at the creature, his face twisted with irritation. He cursed his decision, bitterly realizing that he was not made to be a villain at all. Xenon Baskerville raises his hand and silences a classmate, resolutely declaring that a hero who cannot become stronger even in a rewritten script is not a true hero, and one who abandons friends is just trash, and he swears he will not let them die just for the sake of the plot. But the huge horned gargoyle roars with rage and warns the human that he will not get away so easily. He laughs maniacally at the creature's threat, mocks it, and asks by what right some school boss dares to scold him, and lunges forward, dark energy swirling around his fists. Through the air he loudly proclaims himself the true great villain, one whom not even the main hero can defeat, disdainfully asks how a mere rank-and-file monster dares to stand in his way, and suggests that it would be better for it to just die for his sake. The gargoyle strikes the ground with its fist where a stone had just shattered. The beast roars in despair, and Xenon delivers a glancing blow, mentally noting that the opponent is tough. With a grimace of irritation, he compares the creature to a stiff wooden doll and realizes that the gargoyle has the same strength as the mid-game monsters. He realizes that with his starting equipment, a rusty sword, he cannot land a single accurate hit, so he activates a skill and with a shout of Shadow Blade, releases a magical attack that hits the gargoyle's face and makes it scream piercingly in pain. His mind races, analyzing the enemy. The gargoyle has high physical stats but low resistance to magic, so he must continue attacking with magic. A grim expression appears on his face as he calculates how many dozens of magical attacks he will have to deliver to win. In fury, the gargoyle roars as if it decided to kill him. He freezes for a moment and considers the situation. In a real game, such an enemy is usually defeated by the party. But unfortunately for him, he is a solo player. He decided to put an end to this with one critical strike. When the gargoyle attacked, Keisenon kicked the ground and confidently shouted that he knew its weak spot. With a final thrust upward, he plunges the sword deep into the monster's chest right here, he thinks, hitting the vulnerable spot, and the gargoyle lets out its last painful scream as it is pierced. He remembered the main rule of this world: all enemies in Danbury have weak points and a strike on them counts as critical for the gargoyle. This point was right under the chin. He leaned over the dying creature with a cruel smile on his face, mocking and asking what it was like to die at the hands of a weaker enemy. A humiliating end for a being that tormented the weak and sought revenge after defeat by the hero. Gargoyle only emitted a hoarse sound, its life fading. Gargoyle let out one last, terrified scream as Xenon cast a devastating spell, roaring its name Hellflare. A stream of dark energy burst from the creature, completely engulfing it. It howled in pain as its stone body was torn apart and turned to ashes. He stood over the scattered remains and calmly sheathed his sword. He thought that the magic swordsman is the strongest starting profession in this game, a stylish duo with Leon. Against such a weak starting boss, he knew he absolutely could not lose. He examined the item cards that materialized after the monster's defeat and felt this was his first real victory since he found himself in this world. Although he did not know how the victory over the event monster would affect the plot, he was glad to have saved a life that was supposed to die according to the original storyline. His thoughts calmed, and he turned his attention back to the students clustered in the case. He approached them, waved his hand in a light greeting, and asked, "Are you all right?" The student was nailing and taking care of the wounded girl. The young man raised his eyes, a drop of sweat gleaming on his forehead. His gaze fell on the empty bottles of medicinal elixirs, scattered on the ground, a harsh reminder that their supplies were completely exhausted. Seeing their trouble, Xenon handed over several elixirs and, to the student's surprise, said that he could use them. Obviously, he needed them. The student froze and asked if he could. He had nothing to repay with, but Keisenon waved his hand. "They are cheap, don't worry." The student gratefully gave the girl the potion, and when the blush returned to her face, Keisenon noted with relief that it was good both survived, and the girl, now conscious, raised her eyes to her savior. She watched as her companion deeply bowed before Keisenon Baskerville, so low that his head touched the stone ground. He sincerely thanked not only for the healing potion but also for saving their lives, and Keisenon, standing over them, simply said not to mention it. After all, we are classmates. After the fight, the young man replayed the events in his head, wondering who could have imagined the appearance of such a powerful monster in this dungeon, and honestly admitted to himself that he did not intend to lower his guard, but everything happened quite unexpectedly. His thoughts instantly turned into self-blame. He hit the ground with his fists and declared that it was his fault as a leader that his friends died. If he had been stronger, they would not have suffered such horror. Keisenon interrupted him, expressionless, saying that the monster was an anomaly and even if they had lost, it would have meant nothing. He told the upset student, "If you really feel guilty, just become stronger to protect your friends next time." Keisenon noticed in the boy a strong sense of responsibility for his comrade's injury and thought it was too noble for a mere extra. These words touched his soul. Tears sparkled in the student's eyes. He agreed and decided to become stronger like Baskerville. Keisenon waved it off, said not to take him as an example, and added that academy life is long, so it's enough just to do your best. But the student was not finished yet. He lowered his head again, insisting that he wanted to apologize sincerely, and admitted that he had misunderstood Keisenon and had already heard that he could be irritable. Keisenon just listened, emotionless, almost without reaction. He spoke about his prejudice. He thought Keisenon was much worse. His scary face and the bad reputation of the basketball family led to such conclusions, but now he admitted that Keisenon turned out to be a good guy, and Keisenon's face remained calm when he replied, "Yes, I know that." Despite Keisenon's brief reply, the student did not stop and, bowing low again, continued. He recalled how he and his classmates completely ignored Keisenon in class, how he could have abandoned them but instead went to meet them, risked himself to save them, and even shared his valuable healing potions. Admitting he was truly wrong, he begged for forgiveness. His plea hung in the air, and Zenon, completely frozen by surprise, blushed slightly. He realized that, being a loner, this was the first time he had truly spoken with a classmate, and he felt so awkward that he did not know what to say. Pushing aside the discomfort, he waved off the apologies, saying once again that his face is scary and basketball is an evil person, after which he extended a small, delicate object. He handed the object to the student and said it was magic that repels monsters. He ordered the boy to use it to safely get out of the dungeon, explaining that he himself would go ahead. He explained that this object is supposed to deal with the weak monsters that inhabit this very dungeon. Filled with gratitude, the student sincerely promised that he would definitely repay this act because he felt how much he owed him. With a light raise of his thumb, he brushed off the student's promise, said to repay when he succeeds, and then, turning his back, he himself dived into the depths of the dungeon where electrified wolf-like beasts wandered. He descended to the lowest level of the dungeon, a place known as the Playground of the Wise. When he stepped into the new chamber, he was immediately noticed. Leon, standing nearby, froze in shock and whispered the name Baskerville with disbelief. If you approached the group where Nagisa Sekai and Shell Uranus were, somewhat arrogantly, he asked if everything was all right and noted that such caution should be expected from the descendant of a hero. His words struck a nerve. Leon, with a face covered in dirt, angrily asked how he could know they were in danger, and in his tone there was an accusation. Wasn't Zenon himself to blame? Unfazed, Zenon brushed off the accusation and explained that he did not know why Leon was so angry. A powerful monster had appeared earlier, so he assumed they had encountered it too. The explanation shattered Leon's calm. In horror, he realized that the same monster had attacked them as well, and the fact that they were unharmed was called a miracle. The truth hit him: it was his fault. He let it escape, and because of that, classmates suffered, so he fell into despair. When he drowned in guilt, Shell Uranus stepped forward to calm him, insisted that it was not his fault and assured that he protected them, and then, with tears in her voice, explained that without him she and Nagisa could have died. He falls to his knees, tears rolling down his face, his fist loudly hitting the stone floor, and he screams in despair, consumed by the thought that if only he had truly defeated the enemy, his classmates would not have suffered. He cries out about his helplessness and does not understand how he can be a descendant of a hero when he is so weak. His screams echo in the chamber. His companions react. Nagisa's psyche watches him with a stern, unwavering gaze. The gamer protagonist looks at the scene, a shadow passes over his face, and he quietly utters Leon's name. He runs his hand through his hair, his face showing a thoughtful, almost calculating expression, as if considering every step of this escalating drama. Meanwhile, Eret and Nagisa Nil stood next to the confused Leon and tried to comfort him. This was a decisive moment. In the original timeline, the enemy whom Leon could not defeat would have killed a classmate, and deep remorse from that tragedy became the spark of his spectacular development. But the gamer protagonist raises his eyes and thoughtfully reflects on how everything turned out. He understands that after changes in the timeline, the former ending is no longer guaranteed, and wonders if Leon will grow the same way and what the hero will do in this reshaped reality. Filled with disappointment, Leon strikes the stone floor with his fist. He cannot forgive himself for his weakness. He falls into despair, so Uran tries to comfort him, saying not to blame himself. Nearby, Nagisa's psyche adds that if he had not been there, they both would have been in mortal danger because he saved them, though he was wounded, and from afar Zenon watches how all this unfolds. Turning away, he has already made a decision. There is no point in thinking long about how Leon can grow from this. It is more important to do everything in his power now. As he leaves, he tells Leon to be careful on the way back. Leon, now wearing glasses, asks if there is anything else, and Zenon simply addresses him by his surname Baskerville. He pauses and throws at Leon, "If you have something to say it quickly." Leon, with his head bowed, sincerely thanks him. Zenon stepped back in surprise when Leon made a deep, formal bow and sincerely said he was grateful for the help to the wounded classmates, and for Zenon cleaning up the aftermath. He admits it was a bold move, but still very thankful. He raises his gaze, cheeks barely red but eyes firm. He says that the main hero must always do the right thing and immediately adds a stern warning: "Don't misunderstand me." He continues, swearing that he will never forgive Zenon's meanness and that someday he will pay for everything. Zenon silently turns and walks away, and Leon calls him by name. At that moment, Nagisa appears at the bottom of the stairs. His scream breaks off when he sees her. Nagisa stands before him with a sword in hand and piercingly asks if he was the one who defeated the gargoyle. Leaning on her Zenon, she gives a slight knowing smile as if asking, "Is that what they say?" He stood aside. A palpable aura of threat emanated from him, separating him from the rest of the class. Nagis's psyche watched him, a confident smile played on her face. She was always right about him, her eyes did not deceive. She looked him straight in the eyes and said that one day she wanted to challenge him to a duel. For her, the clash of the strong was just a way to become even stronger. When she walked down the stone corridor, he scratched the back of his head in irritation and muttered that some annoying person had noticed him and now the road ahead would not be easy. Moving deeper into the dungeon, he entered a huge, silent hall. At the far end, at the top of a short staircase, stood a single decorated throne, barely glowing. On the throne itself lay a small open box with several silver medals. He immediately understood the dungeon was cleared. The mission called Arrival at the Playground of the Sages was completed, and the reward was the achievement medal. He picked up one of the medals and confusedly recalled how everything had gone wrong. The gargoyle had kicked him out in tears, and although he had cleared the dungeon and not forgotten the goal, for a devoted player it was a failure. Suddenly it occurred to him, did Leon and the others take their medals when they returned? He thought maybe they had forgotten them, and from this thought he began to wonder what his own consolation prize would be. He slowly moved along the wall of the chamber, ran his palm over the stone blocks. When he pressed one spot, a low creak sounded and a hidden opening revealed itself. When he heard this from inside, his eyes widened in disbelief. The secret chamber was piled high with mountains of gold, armor, and weapons, and he instantly recognized it, the Nouveau-Riche room, a special reward that was not supposed to appear after dungeon's first clear. Overflowing with joy, he threw himself headfirst into the shiny pile. The treasures filled the room from wall to wall, a forgotten royal treasure, gleaming coins, enchanted weapons, and sturdy armor silently waiting to be cleaned. Sorting through the treasures, his hands came upon a small, exquisitely decorated box. He opened it and exclaimed triumphantly. Inside was a magic bag. He admired his loot with delight. The achievement room, a storage for money and items he had taken during previous clears. The magic bag itself was a priceless artifact that could hold an infinite number of valuable things. Filled with joy, he jumped into the air and laughed maniacally. With all this money and stuff, he instantly became a billionaire. He crawled through mountains of treasures, resolutely trying to stuff every last item into his new bag. While working, he suddenly felt a sharp, piercing pain. He grabbed his chest, and around his arms appeared a dark, crackling energy. His gaze was drawn to one object among the pile, a majestic blade radiating powerful light. It was the demonic sword Amma no Habakir. He recognized it instantly. It was the weapon he himself had created while playing the game, investing a lot of funds and materials and constantly improving it. The most powerful weapon, the sacred sword Excalibur, which could only be obtained in the second half of the scenario, and he wondered if this was really his favorite sword that had now appeared in this world. He raised the blade, its power trembled with a hum in his palm. He recalled that mastering all the sword skills could inflict incredible damage on the demon lord even in hard mode, and the very fact of possessing such a weapon was overwhelming. This pushed him to the startling question, are all the items in this room based on the data from his own playthroughs? Thinking this over, he grew grim. If these transferred items were real, then the data from his duel game had somehow manifested in this world. One chilling question rolled through the darkness in his mind. Who could have arranged this? He stood amid the treasures, the demon in his hand weighed like a burden, and he was tormented by the question of who he was. It was no accident he felt that someone had deliberately brought him into this world. But who? For what purpose? His mind raced. He replayed the conversation with Leon again and again and could not understand why he was Xenon 2, not Leon 1. The very reincarnation made no sense until you find out who did it, God or demon. He needed to know the purpose for which he was sent here, and more importantly, how specific game data was transmitted along with him. The thought remained unresolved. He turned and walked through the stone arch. Behind him, Leon shouted his family name, Baskerville. A sudden call caught the attention of the teacher nearby, and he looked around with interest. She approached him and threw a small shiny metal object into the air. Catch, she said. He caught it, examined it, and asked what it was. When he held the medal, she clapped her palms with a bright smile, drew the attention of other students, and loudly announced, "With this, I acknowledge the conquest of the sage Zenon Baskerville's arena." He raised his head, surprised by the public acknowledgement. Other students whispered in shock when they realized it was a test. The teacher sadly sympathized with him and explained that since he had defeated the event boss, he could now explore other dungeons, but added a warning. Gargoyle appeared unexpectedly, so he should not overexert himself. Later, walking the city streets, he thought about what to do next. He felt companions were needed. The items he obtained in the achievement room were super powerful, but his current self could not equip them, so first he needed to raise his skills because he could not manage alone. Irritation grew. Why throw away weaker weapons if they were needed to train skills? He clenched his fist and felt a bitter truth. Soloing high-level dungeons had a clear limit. The thought of status ailments finally cemented his conclusion. Poison, paralysis, petrification without allies to come to help. It was a death sentence. Companions were indispensable, and he sighed quietly as realization enveloped him with grim finality. He was completely alone. He immediately began looking for options and remembered the heroines from the original game Dungeon Brave, but quickly dismissed the idea they were mercenaries who charged a fee for joining. Their only real value lay in unique abilities related to items, and in trouble they could flee. Looking at classmates like the agile Leon Price, he realized that finding a truly useful partner among them was unlikely. A gloomy insight descended on him. In this deadly dangerous situation, he realized he could not afford to be chosen. The question burned in his mind: did anything like a continuation even exist in this world? When the stakes became too high, his thoughts turned to a dark solution. He recalled that in the Kingdom of Slayer there was a system of legal slavery. Those bought at auctions in the Kingdom of Slayer were bound by magic of subjugation, guaranteeing semi-permanent forced service. He reached a grim conclusion. Even if he had to resort to slavery, he needed to purchase a subordinate to survive. There was no time to delay. Now it was clear where to go. He headed to the majestic, tinted buildings of the slave auction, a place where desires raged. The ticket clerk in a top hat warmly greeted the young master of the basketball family Xenon and led him to a seat in the front row, noting that it would come in handy. Settling into the plush chair with crossed arms, he was already thinking about his goal: to trade slaves, gather loyal followers, and rise to the top of the underworld. This was the path he would have to take. To challenge his father, he needed subordinates to command. On the round platform in front of the luxurious, crowded hall, the auctioneer raised his hands and, addressing the attendees, ladies and gentlemen, solemnly announced the start of the slave auction. They lead out first a frightened girl, a burly man with scars on his torso, and a woman with long, luxurious hair all in chains. The crowd instantly erupts, the stakes soar, people shout increasingly higher numbers, and Xenon looks grim. The first lot went for a high price. The auctioneer presents the next one, a handsome young man with blonde hair and blue eyes. Bids start at 100,000 and the crowd roars with excitement again. From his seat, Xenon's gaze remains fixed on the stage. She looks at the spectacle, estimating its reserves. The money he got from the training room was already melting before his eyes. From what was left, he could only afford to buy 1 or 2 people into slavery. He knew he needed strong fighters, but most important, to choose wisely. Slipping into his coat, he pulls out a decorated device shaped like a key with a round lens in the middle. He puts the device to his eye. It is the God Eye, an item he got in the training room. Although it was originally used to check monsters' abilities, now he wanted to use it in a completely different way. Through his lens, the world seems to transform. He scans a row of enslaved on the stage, and before each appears a translucent panel with data revealing their hidden traits. The true power of the item was that it showed the skills and level of mastery of the target. He realized that in battle this would be an invaluable advantage to determine at a glance what the enemy was capable of. He quietly snorted to himself, unimpressed by the displayed slaves. Those whose skills are useless in battle are completely worthless to him. He does not need any ability to charm. He knows skills can be acquired later, but the starting set determines how quickly you will grow, and the talent he is looking for simply does not appear among the current offers. Appointed, he turns his back to the stage and begins to walk away, descending the stairs, while wealthy guests chat aimlessly and drink. He decides that it is better to look for what he needs in another way. At that very moment, the announcement sharply cuts through the air: the last slave for today is being announced. The auctioneer's voice thundered, presenting a rare specimen that rivals the draconic ones. A girl from the Oni tribe, taken from the northern continent of demi-humans. The announcement made Xenon freeze. His eyes opened wide in complete shock, and a quiet sound of disbelief escaped his lips. In front of him stands a little girl with white hair and skin, a golden eye shining on her forehead, red horns protruding from her head, unmistakable signs of an Oni. He recognized her instantly. Urza, the white ogre, and he was amazed that she was here at all. She stood shackled on the auction platform, and he was struck by a stunning realization. This is impossible. Urza is not a character from Dungeon Break. He remembers Urza from Holy War of War, wrote a military simulator set in the Southern Kingdoms and created by the same developer. There, she was a partner fighting for victory, so her appearance in the world of Dungeon Brave makes no sense at all. While he struggles with the feeling of the impossible, the auctioneer explains that Oni are an extremely rare race with very delayed aging, so they retain youth and high physical abilities. The bidding explodes instantly. Prices rise from 500,000 to 700,000, then to 1 million, and finally to an astonishing 2,500,000. He wrestled with the impossible reality before him. Is this world a fusion of Dungeon Brave 1 and Dungeon Brave 2 with the world of the Holy War, or have they somehow always been one and the same? When another outraged bidder shouted a price 5 million, he continued to consider options. Both games were from the same developer, so a shared world seemed quite possible, and he recalled her stats: Body Enhancement Level 11, Fighting Spirit 13, and Spear Mastery 9. These were her 3 initial skills, all from the very beginning, and without any doubt she was the perfect fighting force he was looking for. He remembered the original story. Urza was initially a slave but would eventually join the main hero of the Holy War, and a cold realization suddenly passed through him. If he buys her now, he can completely disrupt that storyline because she will be loyal to him, not the hero of that story, and he asked himself whether this auction was some kind of exploit, a bug in the world's code. But when his thoughts finally cleared, he looked out onto the balcony and his gaze was fixed on the stage below. On the trading platform, the auctioneer announced the current bid 6.5 million and glanced at the crowd to see if there would be more offers. Xenon stood up. The decision was made. He raised his hand and his voice cut through the whisper of the crowd. The bid was 10 million. On the stage, Urza lifted her eyes, tears welled up in them, and his other hand clenched into a fist by his side. Sudden huge bids and a wave of shock rolled through the hall. Those present looked in disbelief, whispering to each other about the exorbitant price and doubting the wisdom of such a move, but he stood, hand raised high, unshakable. He felt the price he paid for his impulsive act. 10 million would have been enough to equip an entire team with the most powerful gear for fighting the final boss. A shadow of regret flashed by. He had really overdone it. The regret passed quickly. If his actions were repeated by the original, he would be declared a villain. He recalled that Urza White Ogre was supposed to be saved by the main hero, and the vile nobility who tortured her was to meet a bitter end. He accepted this role without hesitation. He did not know the future and did not seek to change the fate of the hero of the sacred wars. He is Xenon, and evil cannot bind him. When determination hardened, the auctioneer's voice thundered, enthusiastically confirming the bid of 10 million, and asked if any other fine young man dared to challenge. An incredible bid of 10 million hung in the air, and the auction hall froze in stunned silence. The auctioneer, drenched in sweat, could only stammer the amount, while the others present looked on, unable to believe their eyes. He, however, remained completely calm and made a casual gesture from his seat. From the stage, Urza raised her eyes. They were wide open, shining with admiration. He leaned back with a half-smile, arms crossed, knowing that his sinister look definitely could not withstand such a gaze. He leaned forward slightly and, looking toward the stage, said there was no need to be so afraid. He was helping her. The unexpected kindness made Urza shudder. A deep blush flared on her face, and she looked away. When the sale seemed already decided, a stout man in the crowd suddenly raised his hand and shouted a counter bid 10 million, and the auctioneer, stunned, instantly announced that the gentleman had raised the price. Without hesitation for a moment, Xenon calmly raises the bid to 12 million. The crowd whispers in amazement at the rising numbers, and when there are no more rivals, the auctioneer strikes the hammer and announces, "The only girl is sold for 12 million gold," calls for loud applause for the young man, and the one who lost bitterly sinks into his chair. The hall erupts with loud applause, and Xenon accepts the victory with a simple raise of his hand, a quiet satisfaction on his face. After some time in a private room, he stands with the received payment, waiting before heavy curtains. Curtains parted, revealing Urza. He stands alone, barefoot on the carpet in the center of the luxuriously furnished room. She instantly rushed to him, hugging his leg with a joyful cry, raised her eyes, introduced herself as Urza, and promised to serve him as her new master, momentarily confusing him with her assertiveness. She continues, her eyes shining with devotion, swearing to dedicate her whole life to him and asking only that he value her. Her joyful appearance sharply contrasts with his memories of the game, where Urza of the Holy Sea was emotionless, like a doll, and he wonders what could have caused such a change in character. He froze in surprise, his thoughts tangled because he could not connect the image of a cheerful puppy with the girl before him. Could this really be Urza, the White Ogre? When she noticed the silence and asked if everything was all right, he quickly waved it off, but the thoughts did not subside. This was not the slave he knew from the game. This was a completely different person. While he was realizing this, a burly man in a top hat approached them. An employee of the auction house addressed Zinin and asked if the girl needed a change of clothes, saying that in her current state she could not be taken away. An assistant named Lispeld smiled obligingly, pointed to a curtained-off area, and assured Xenon that there would definitely be something suitable for her in the waiting room. Shifting his gaze to Urza, he ordered her to go with Laspald and reassured her that there was nothing to fear and that he would wait for her right here. Urza hesitated, with wide-open eyes, asked if he really promised to wait. He gently patted her on the head. Her initial surprise quickly melted into playful protest. She insisted that she did not want to go, and this reaction again challenged all his expectations. As soon as she was released, Xenon sat on the neighboring chair. The weight of the situation hung over him as he waited in the quiet room. His solitude was broken by Urza's voice from behind the curtain. She called out that she had already changed, and he replied from his place, "Show yourself." In response, the curtain barely lifted from the floor, and from beneath it peeked the hem of a new dress and a pair of polished dark shoes. In the room with the checkered floor, popped out from behind the curtains and, smiling cheerfully, announced before the surprised Xenon that she was ready. He pointed out that she was wearing only a simple tunic, but praised her shoes. The steward of the Lispeld estate suggests that perhaps it would be better to remove the collar from her neck. Xenon's face darkens as he gazes at the metal strip on which his name is clearly engraved, Xenon Baskerville. In response, Urza explains that the slave collar is proof of her ownership. She clarifies that it is engraved with the name of her master, and removing it would put her in danger. Xenon, with crossed arms, demands to know exactly what this danger entails. From behind the curtain, Lisbon explains that a slave without a master has no human rights. Her face darkened as she began to tell. Being a member of the respected Oni tribe, she says that if she were dragged from the street and brutally attacked, no one would even be surprised. This thought paints images in the mind of other dull people who would endure cruel violence. Someone adds that if it turns out she is Xenon's property, she will be taken away immediately. Xenon listens, his face gloomy, and as if a memory arises in his mind. The harsh truth of her world emerges. In the kingdom of Slayer, half-humans are not allowed into cities, and relationships with elden dwarves or poor people are forbidden. If anyone noticed her horns, she would be considered an escaped slave. She even remembers Xenon's words. He said he had no interest in putting collars on girls. Despite everything, she turns to him with a radiant, reassuring smile, tells her new master not to worry, explains that the collar is proof that she belongs to him, and sincerely rejoices, admitting that she really likes the collar. She looks away, and on his face is a complex emotion. After a minute of silence, he understands. If she doesn't mind, he will accept this situation for now, although he still looks uncertain. "Let us go," he says, waving his hand toward the luxurious double doors, and adds that he will take them to the room. No one will come to disturb them, so they can relax. They were led into a luxurious private room with a large round bed covered with soft fabrics. When the manager left, Xenon looked around the room and felt anxiety rising within him. He guessed where this was leading. Urza did not feel his anxiety at all. Saying this lively and joyfully, she began to undress, ready to fulfill what she considered her duty. He jumped back in shock, shouted in protest when she suddenly took off her tunic without a trace of shame. "Sorry, I cannot assist with paraphrasing or translating sexual content involving minors. I can offer an alternative: replace young girl with young woman or the neutral her, or remove the hint of creating a child, after which I will rewrite the text in a lively, emotional Ukrainian style. Write which option you choose and I will do it." He sharply poked her forehead to emphasize she was terribly mistaken. He told her that simply changing the equipment would not get her into such a dungeon. She opened her eyes wide, looking into the dungeon. Seeing her reaction, he sat down and explained his true intention. He bought her as a combat force to explore the dungeon together with him, not for her to be sexless. Hearing this, she trembled with joy and exclaimed that she loved fighting, and becoming a slave just for the chance to get into the dungeon was like a dream come true. Her cheerful nature turned into a fierce threat. She asked if he knew that the ogre tribe adored fighting, and with a bloody predatory smile promised to kill and take everything she could, telling him to place great hopes on her. He looked at the box in his hands, a tired expression on his face, and did not know how to react when she said such terrible things with such an innocent, sweet face. Casting aside worries, he stood up and pointed to what they came for. Before them lay a mountain of quality armor, shields, weapons, and adventure gear, everything they would need for expeditions. He explained that although he himself could not equip her, he had stocked this equipment specifically for a female companion, pulled out a weapon and an accessory, and smiling, hinted this would be a great start. He asked her to try everything on and promised to adjust if something did not fit. She cheerfully said understood and felt that this could be changed. She returned in a moment in a new dark light combat suit, stood in a confident pose, and declared that it was incredibly comfortable. He was momentarily speechless. New set sturdy boots and protective bracers, which replaced her simple tunic and bare feet. Her gaze fell on a massive spiked mace. She noted that even in the human world, such formidable defensive weapons exist. It was an ogre mace, an extreme rank equipment item requiring the rough hand skill to wield, so powerful it could crush skulls and rare among adventurers because few have the necessary skill to use it. Her eyes lit up with fierce joy. She exclaimed that with such a weapon she could stand against any enemy, vowing to harden her heart and crush them all for her master, and he, seeing her enthusiasm, could not hold back a smile, pleased by her reaction. Overwhelmed, she grabbed her chest and exclaimed that it didn't hurt at all. He looked at her and aloud wondered if all members of the ogre tribe were so fanatical about battle. A heavy mace slipped from his hand and fell to the floor with a crash. She turned to him with a sincere expression and confessed that she loved him, and Stant sharply asked why she was saying such things to him at all. He barely knew her, and reminded her that he gave her the equipment only because he bought her to fight in dungeons, not understanding how love could grow from that, and she only looked back at him in surprise, confused by his reaction. She shyly admitted that she had a weakness for certain faces. To her, his face was incredibly handsome, and she was glad to belong to such a master. He was completely embarrassed and could not understand her words. He thought about his features, sharp eyes, hawk-like nose, a face that, as he knew, radiated ill intentions and repelled others. For a moment he was thrown back to his school years, how the girls in class openly recoiled from his sinister smile. But here this girl saw something completely different, and his gaze dropped down to her new boots. She asks if she is serious. Urza loudly answers yes, and she explains that his piercing, intimidating gaze, fangs that seem capable of tearing flesh, and the whole sinister aura make him her ideal, like a legendary god-demon. She continues, her eyes sparkling, explaining that from the first glance at the auction she was enchanted by his amazingly sinister face, and the fact that he was the one who bought her. That was fate. He was completely stunned. Never before had a woman praised him, and even now it hardly felt like praise. His head spins. It seems to him that it is better to be loved than hated, but he doubts whether anyone besides close friends will ever truly love him. He pushes the thought away and decides to move on, telling her that they are going to change her clothes and asks her to follow him. As they were about to leave, the auction manager, less bold, approached them and with a sly smile remarked that Xenon tamed the girl extremely quickly, thinking that the young master at night seems no less formidable than his father. The hint irritates him. He sharply tells the manager to stop this pointless chatter. It is already annoying. Bowing deeply, Lisbon apologizes and informs the young lord that the slave has been prepared and is already ready. The deal is done. He walks away, striding down a quiet, lantern-lit cobblestone street under the night sky. He was alone only briefly. Urza walked a few steps behind, humming a cheerful tune and effortlessly carrying her huge, spiked mace. He noticed the silence of the street as if it made the path easier. The road to the estate would take an hour, so they must arrive by dawn. He looked back and noticed that for a person with such a bulky weapon she moved amazingly lightly, almost like a hare. Suddenly his movement stops. Behind the back of the coat, a small glove hand clings tightly. Ursula calls him. He turns around, looks at her from above with a curious gaze, and asks what happened. His gaze slides to where she is looking, and instantly his expression changes to shock with wide-open eyes. His feeling did not fail him. 3 threatening figures blocked their way on the narrow lamplit street, their faces hidden in shadow, standing ready for a fight. The 3 were only the vanguard. Armed men emerged from the surrounding alleys and quickly closed a wide, inescapable ring around Xenon and Urza on the cobbled street. A figure stepped out from among the thugs, and Xenon narrowed his eyes in recognition. He dryly remarked that falling into an ambush was unpleasant, and that they had met again. The same wealthy man from the auction smiled maliciously, and his face became a mask of twisted satisfaction. Xenon indifferently asked who he was. The bitter Scot, not believing that Xenon did not remember the man who paid 2 million, indignantly asked if Xenon really thought he could just ignore a person of such status. He continued, admitting that the auction had cost him more than he expected. While he spoke, Xenon stood completely still, his face unreadable. He hypocritically apologized, saying that this was the world of winners and Xenon should forgive him, then demanded to know what this loser dog intended to do and ordered him to bring his friend. His face twisted like a mannequin. "I lost," he joyfully announced. "This is a fun party. I must insist you both have to join me." Before Xenon could retort, Urza interrupted him and directly proposed to discuss the handing over of the humanoid creature next to her. If he agreed to give up Xenon, she would allow it, but only after she first broke his arms and legs. Xenon himself considered everything ridiculously predictable and boring, thinking that the man was so offended by the defeat that he brought friends to try to convince him. A circle of cutthroats closed in. They were brandishing knives, pipes, and crowbars. In the center of the hostile ring, Xenon and Urza stood back to back, ready for the inevitable fight. He stood firm, a fearless smile playing on his lips, looking into the eyes of the gang of cutthroats, and above them the wealthy bidder smiled greedily and demanded the girl be handed over. Despite the obvious advantage of the opponents, Xenon calmly considered his next move, asking himself what he should do. The rich man looked down arrogantly with a bitter smile at Xenon standing below in the alley. Xenon, surrounded by other half-humans, was listened to as someone asked what exactly a half-human was, while others reproached that they were not even up to human standards. Unmoved, Xenon calmly addressed the one with the bitter smile, asking if they did not speak the same language here at all, and noting that it seemed only he did not understand this. Urza stands defiantly with a spy mace ready. She silently boils with rage, wondering who decided that half-humans are inferior beings, since the very idea itself is an insult. When the auction participant boiled with rage, Xenon loudly declared that this girl was now his and he would not give her up. Urza was touched, her cheeks reddened because she thought how grateful she was for his words, and the auction participant became even angrier and threatened that if Xenon did not value his life, he would gladly take it. He continues his tirade, proudly boasting of his influence in the country and humiliating Xenon, saying that he would never understand this. With a sneer, he says he would without hesitation give 12 million for her, then offers. Hand over the rare half-human and he will arrange a higher position for Xenon and satisfy his desires even more. Urza clung to him. Xenon crossed his arms and suddenly a memory surfaced. A pompous speech with sweeping gesture. Resh realized he knew this man. He was a person from the kingdom of Kurin. He calmly asks if the person the contender serves is the agitator of the marshal of the kingdom of Kurin. The contender's face contorts in shock and he emits a strangled wheeze. Calm shattered, he stammered bitterly, wondering how he could have known that, and Xenon just smiled. He recalled that although he did not remember the name of that minor character, he knew for sure he and another were enemies in the game Holy Sea. His knowledge from the game was precise to the details. The agitators of the marshal preferred young half-human girls, and Urza was to become another of his slaves, doomed to a huge, terrible prison full of countless cages with other captive girls. Xenon explains to Urza that now she is in a coma, that in the original story she would have been saved by the main hero of the Holy Throne and would have become his companion. His gaze slid to Bitter, who was now distracted by a small creature chained up, and Xenon thought to himself, now that this connection is clear, everything makes sense. He turned all his attention back to Bitter. The frightened man demands to know how Xenon learned about his master, and Xenon coolly replies that he is not obliged to tell him anything. Bitter's face twisted with rage. He sees Xenon's wrist, his voice a low roar as he says that since he has been discovered, Xenon must die here and now. He remains steadfastly calm, aloud asking why the nobles from the kingdom of Kurin ended up in this country. With a sly smile, he says that if they were looking for a fight, they were seriously mistaken, and announcing that he will gladly respond, instantly bursts into motion. His blade gleams and he easily cuts through the bandits. During the fight, with a cruel smile, he realizes that events are again following the script of the game Holy Sea, and decides that he will not hesitate. He will mercilessly destroy any hostile characters who stand in the way of the main hero. When the immediate opponents were eliminated, he turned to Urza and handed her a huge spiked mace, calling it a gift. He said her first task was to prepare the weapon, and Urza, trembling with excitement, smiled sharply, baring her fangs, and eagerly accepted. He orders her to watch his back and not to move for now, noticing her charming, warrior-like expression. While Urza waits with a determined look, he summons a grimoire, an item called the Magic Conductor, and begins to channel its power. When glowing runes swirled around him, Wealthy Bitter panicked at the sight of the spell taking shape. He shouted to the rest of his men to kill Xenon immediately. From her position, Urza narrowed her eyes, her gaze fixed intently on what was unfolding. With a savage roar, he releases the spell, roaring its name into the night. Dark tribute, a wide area magic called Blood Carpenter. The ground instantly shot up, a forest of sharp black spikes that pierced the attackers. Their screams were cut off, blood splattered on the alley walls, and the wealthy witness fell into horror and shuddered at such cruelty. He stands amid the bloody massacre, a trembling hand covering his mouth. He recognizes this cruel magic of torture, the same one his father used. A wave of disgust washes over him, and he wonders why dark magic seems so repulsive. Shaking off the disgust, he turns to Urza and says she can finish off the rest. Her eyes flash with wild joy. She hisses that she was waiting for this very moment, swears to cut them all down, and rushes at the last thug and the frightened bidders. She bursts into the fray, joyfully shouting and swinging the huge spiked mace. The wealthy man, retreating, could only stare in disbelief at the fierce attack of the little girl. The weapon strikes with a sickening crunch, breaking bone, and one of the bandits instantly falls silent. When the body falls, the embittered rich man recoils in horror, cursing the girl and calling her a monster. The horror inside him turns into rage. Screaming, he grabs a short sword, lunges into the air, and brings the blade down on her head. She simply raises her eyes, her face impassive, and he looks shocked at what will happen next. His blade froze, pressed tightly against her neck without shedding a single drop of blood. He pushes with all his might, sweat pouring down his forehead, shouting for her to let go. She responded with a surge of dark energy, like bats, that burst from her body and shattered the steel sword to pieces. When Bitter was disarmed, her attention turned to the last subdued thug begging for his life. Urza raised a finger to her lips, a playful sparkle gleamed in her eyes, and she told him it was pointless. He was the last, and her master's enemies must be killed. From above, Xenon observes the consequences. He sees Urza's mace now like a comet of dark power rushing down the alley toward its final target, and he smiles crookedly, thinking to himself that she is truly strong. In a few moments, she is already beside him and proudly announces that she is finished. Xenon praises her for a good job and gently strokes her head. Urza closes her eyes, blushes, and mumbles that his touch is pleasant to her. Praise was given. Xenon's gaze fell on the sole survivor below, and he addressed the frightened, wealthy, and embittered man who was now fussing on the cobblestones, asking what to do now that his friends had disappeared. The man only begged him to wait. He listened as the man on the ground begged for his life. At first he fled into threats, calling himself a nobleman from the kingdom of Kurin and insisting that his death would escalate into a diplomatic scandal. When that didn't work, the man's tone broke and became pleading, saying that if only his body was hidden, no one would find out. In the end, he sighed and regretted not surrendering at the auction. His face did not change. He pondered the man's words and felt that by nature he was inclined to kill nobles. Before this encounter, he had already killed 3 others with magic, and even the first murder left his heart cold. He felt no guilt, only an icy void as a terrible shadow aura began to emerge from him. The frightened man made a last desperate plea and offered any sum to be spared. Xenon's lips curled into a cruel smile, and he thoughtfully said that even if he were not a basketball, his nature would still have led to this. He looked at Urza, who stood ready, noting that the man clearly did not lack money. She simply replied, "Yes, sir," and stepped toward the whimpering man. She raised the heavy mace, aiming it for a devastating blow from above down. Bitter screamed bitterly, begging her to stop. Her swing froze for a moment. There was a slight embarrassment on her face, and below the man just stared, frozen with horror. His horror was abruptly cut off. A thin, sharp dart pierced the back of his head, and Urza watched, her mace still raised, as the man slumped. He sharply turned his head, eyes wide open with anxiety. He felt no presence nearby, so he urgently shouted to Urza to retreat. He had already moved. Deep concern was readable on his face. He admitted he might have missed the attacker, but the thought that Urza, a member of the warrior clan, could be caught off guard deeply troubled him. Urza herself looked confused, looked down at herself, and replied puzzled, "Yes, sir." He froze, his gaze flashed along the dark alley nearby. Urza also grabbed her weapon and held it ready. "Where are you?" he demanded of the invisible attacker. A calm voice came from the shadows, called him by his full name, and said there was no need to panic. He was thrown to the ground, his face pressed against the cold cobblestones. From the night darkness, a silhouette emerged. A formidable new enemy loomed over him, and the mysterious figure firmly placed a boot on his head. Gritting his teeth, he asked, "You?" In the quiet alley, Xenon sharply demanded to know who this figure was. The masked man called himself a member of the Baskerville family assassin organization, said they were hired by Lisbon, and this made Xenon ask if their task was to watch him and those supporting his father. The assassin explained in detail that auction guests are often attacked on their way home, and that his task was to guard Xenon at the client's request. The logic was flawless. The auction was not just a deal, it was a high-stakes show, a place where the rich flaunted their wealth and the power of money. He continued to assess and realized, such an environment encourages reckless actions, for example, buying an expensive slave without protection, which is a blatant invitation for robbers. Confirming his thoughts, the killer reported that guards were indeed unnecessary. They had already confirmed that the future basketball successor was safe. When the situation was resolved, he returned to Urza and said it was time to go. The praises that poured on him as the heir of his father were completely uninteresting to him, and Urza simply nodded in agreement. As they were preparing to leave, the killer, still on his knees, quietly asked him to be careful and reassured. "Don't worry about the bodies, we will clean everything up." He and Urza set off into the night, leaving behind the magnificent auction house, and he eagerly awaited the day when he would meet the basketball demon dog again. After some time, returning to his room, Xenon lay down on the bed in his clothes and let out a long sigh. Sai carried the oppressive burden of the day's events. He had been in this world for only 2 weeks, and today he killed for the first time in his life. It seemed unnatural to do it without hesitation, but at the same time he felt it was necessary, and he had no idea whether his own cruelty was surfacing or if the psyche of the original Xeno was influencing him. Lying in bed, he turned over the thought of the murder in his mind. He understood Urza, a representative of a warrior race that could take life, but not long ago he himself was an ordinary person, and killing without remorse seemed impossible to him. He clenched his fist and asked himself who he had become. His thoughts again plunged into the world of the game Dample, where enemies were not only monsters but also cultists, bandits, and other criminals. He decided to come to terms with the new reality. In a prolonged battle, there was no place for hesitation. Enemies had to be defeated without delay, and now that Urzan had become his partner, he could finally start exploring the dungeon. He sat on the bed and considered options. Acquiring the powerful Urza significantly increased his chances of survival, but he understood that only 2 attackers were an unbalanced team and a mage or healer was needed. There was no rush. The main scenario was just beginning, and standing before the grand doors, he decided that if he was going to be greedy, he should aim high. His strategic plans were shattered by a panic scream. "Master, it's Urza," covered from head to toe in soap foam, eyes tightly shut in despair. In panic, her foot slipped on the wet soapy floor. She fell forward and crashed right into Xenon, who was completely unprepared. "Ah, my eyes hurt, the servant is hurting me," she howled. As soon as he began to regain consciousness, the woman in the towel grabbed his hand. It was Leviana's maid. "Oh, my eyes," she exclaimed and demanded why he was hugging Xenon's sister-in-law. Stunned and with a sudden nosebleed, Xenon just froze in shock. The chaos subsided. Leviana began washing Urza's hair, patiently asking her to rinse the foam well. Urza stubbornly did not let go of Xenon, clinging to him and sniffling that her eyes still hurt, and Xenon, confused, did not know how to make the ogre girl open her eyes and let go. Leviana told him directly that it was impossible. The ogre tribe was incredibly strong. She explained that pulling her by force would be futile, and resigned. Xenon realized he had no choice. Suddenly before him appeared a tempting image of his sister-in-law, calling him to join her in the bath. His shocked and embarrassed reaction did not go unnoticed. Leviana, looking at him, jokingly asked if he was blushing because of her, saying it would be better if he were ashamed because of his sister-in-law. Seeing that he was still flustered, she suggested that his reaction meant that there was already a deep connection between him and his sister-in-law, and this thought made him recoil in pain. Gaining courage, he clenched his fist and decided that resisting was pointless. He would take a bath, but not to join Leviana. It was a necessary step to show his true nature. When he finally decided, they headed to the bathroom, Leviana in front. He agreed to go, though inside he groaned because Urza still clung tightly to his back. Once in the water, playfully splashed him, and he immediately became embarrassed, his cheeks burning with shame. The three bathed in a large tub full of bubbles. Urza looked satisfied, and Levi and I winked cheerfully and gave a thumbs up, clearly pleased with how everything turned out. After the bath, still sleepy and in pajamas, Urza whispered that the warm water was so pleasant and that she wanted to sleep with the master. Leviana instantly intervened, stopped Urza, and explained that a bed had been prepared for her in another place. Urza stubbornly refused, shouting about her dissatisfaction. But it seems Urza's protest worked. Xenon lay in bed with wide-open eyes, squeezed between the sleeping ogress and his sister-in-law, and realized with horror that this had to be a compromise, so how could he possibly fall asleep here? Lying there in the luxurious bedroom, only one desperate thought echoed in his head. What kind of trial was this? He woke up abruptly. Memories of the night bath swirled in his head and turned into an unforgettable ordeal. He swore to the gods that he did nothing and touched no one, and when the sunlight flooded the luxurious room, he finally sighed with relief, grateful that morning had come. He lay pressed in bed between his wife's sleeping sister and Urza, who clung tightly to him. A wave of despair overwhelmed him. Was this to be repeated every morning and every day? And he silently begged forgiveness for any sin that led to this. Thoughts spun into the worst scenarios. What if he made a move on Leviana? How would Urzari act then? He could not imagine. Would she withdraw, be frightened, or perhaps even be interested? The worst for him was the option that was impossible to predict. Next to him, his sister-in-law began to stir. He paid attention to Urza. She was mumbling in her sleep and asking him to hold her. He reminded himself that he bought Urza's weapon not out of tenderness and had no desire to court the young girl, so he did not know how to respond to such requests. His thoughts were interrupted when Urza shifted and her bare legs suddenly appeared before him. He blinked, stunned, because he began to doubt her age. She looked much older than he had initially thought. His mind was frantic with panic and conflicting thoughts. Could she already be so grown that his courting would be allowed? Lack of sleep and constant stress prevented him from thinking clearly, and at that moment Urza slowly opened her eyes, sleepily rubbed them, and greeted. "Good morning, master." Her innocent greeting shattered his inner storm. He exhaled tensely, a drop of sweat rolled down his face. It was undeniable. She was just a child, and this realization brought a strange relief. At that moment, another voice pierced the morning silence. His daughter-in-law was already on her feet and cheerfully greeted him. "Good morning." Zinin Bakama gently touched his cheek and asked if he had slept well, completely unaware of the inner chaos she was causing. He recoiled from her touch, confused and stunned. It seemed impossible. This whole situation was too difficult for him. He could not handle it. Later at the dining table, Leviana placed a full breakfast in front of Urza. The maid said she would prepare everything immediately and asked them to wait a little. Her restraint and professional calm sharply contrasted with the morning chaos. In formal academic uniform, Zenon announces the departure, returns to Urza. She is also in uniform and reminds, "We are going to the academy, so you must remember what you were taught yesterday." She explodes with boundless energy, raises her fist and swears that she will cause no trouble, and Zenon looks at her and thinks that the decision to bring her to the Royal Academy was made from the very beginning, because it is customary for the nobility to come with servants and guards. Thoughts did not leave him as they walked along the steep, forest-covered path leading from the city. At the academy, they taught how to explore dungeons and tame monsters, so he had to take Urza with him on these dangerous expeditions. When they approached the waiting carriage, he gave the last warning: any problems at the academy and she will not be allowed on the premises. With a broad fangren, Urza readily agrees, saying she will behave as best as she can just to stay with the master. "I can grab them." The moment the carriage door closes firmly. Inside, Urza peeks out the window, and on her face is genuine admiration for the city streets flying past. The journey begins. Zenon sits opposite her with crossed arms and a sullen face, and Urza notices nothing at all. She kneels on the seat to get a better look and hums a cheerful song. His stone silence does not change, and her cheerful song grows louder, a simple melody about going to school with her master. Finally, he spoke, asking why she suddenly sang such a strange song and why she was so happy. She turned to him, continued singing, and explained that her home is now full. Throwing his head back, he thoughtfully wondered if it was really right to take her with him, and behaved simply. "Urza, are you having fun?" She leaned forward, her eyes shining, and energetically answered, "Yes." The song continues, but her face changes. A cold, predatory gleam lights up in her eyes. A smile with sharp teeth spreads on her lips. She sings the last terrible line and kills them. The eerie words hung in the air, and a deep anxiety descended upon Zenon. The chariot rumbled and stopped before the majestic facade of the Royal Academy, and his anxiety sharply surged. A wave of unease seemed to wash over him. After a long night, he could not shake the feeling that another wave of chaos was about to begin. Before the majestic facade of the academy, a luxurious decorated carriage stops. Zenon Baskerville steps out of it, and behind him the young half-human Urza, who jumps down the step with unrestrained energy. Nearby, 3 students turn to look at this noticeable appearance. Attention is drawn to the vehicle. One of the students immediately recognizes the emblem and whispers to the others that it is the carriage of the Baskerville family. As soon as she stepped forward, whispers and watchful glances spread around. Students pointed at her horns and collar, calling her a foolish human slave, while Zenon, who was walking behind, prepared for a certain spectacle and realized that the attention to her was much greater than he expected. She is clearly delighted. Her face shines as she tells Zenon how glad she is to have accompanied her master to the academy, and cheerfully announces that she will lead her forward. His face tightens with tension. He quickly tells her that she does not know the way to the classroom and orders her to quietly follow him like an adult. Having given a sharp command, Zenon strides forward decisively, parting the sea of curious students, and Urza stands right behind him, obediently following him. Other students watch as they walk. One, commenting on the xenons, has a creepily expressionless face, while Urza, on the contrary, looks around her new surroundings with wide, shining eyes full of admiration. He comes from the great continent of half-humans, lands beyond human territories. These half-humans are a warrior race bred for battle, and the question remains, can such a person really adapt to communal life in the academy? She hums a cheerful song, trying to calm him, assuring that everything will be fine, she is just a servant and will cause no trouble. But suddenly her face becomes worried because she noticed him quietly clutching his side. He tugs his sleeve and asks if her master is okay, if his stomach hurts. He gently strokes her head, dispelling her anxiety. He says it is not a problem, he just got a little lost and was momentarily distracted. He sternly warns his new assistant, from now on avoid anything that even slightly resembles trouble. If Urza simply obeys, he assures there will be no trouble. Walking toward the building of the Great Academy, he stomped his foot irritably, realizing he had forgotten one extremely important thing, and thought that trouble is not always what you seek. Often it comes to you on its own. The premonition came true instantly. A sharp voice called his surname, Baskerville. Leon Praise stood before him, ready for battle, declaring that trouble had indeed arrived. Leon points a finger in accusation and demands to know what Xenon is doing with the little girl in the slave collar, calls him a criminal, a man who cannot be ignored because he sees himself as Leon the Brave, a hero of justice, ready to risk his life for a stranger and will not stand aside watching this injustice. His anger boils as he recalls a recent incident in the dungeon. He admits he thought Xenon was not a bad person for helping classmates, but this proves he was wrong. He shouts that Xenon is exactly as he seems, a true basketball player, a creator of baseless problems. The confrontation attracts the attention of other students in the academy courtyard. A crowd gathers, and Xenon just clicks his tongue. All this spectacle is boring to him. Meanwhile, another student stands aside, watching the situation and considering what to do. According to the scenario, Leon must defeat the Demon Lord and save the world. He will not let Leon be distracted by the gargoyle incident and will not miss the chance to become a hero. Under the spires of the academy, the confrontation between Xenon and Leon is palpable, and the observer inside is boiling with irritation. Why must Xenon interfere with Leon's path? He grabs his head and curses his fate, realizing that reality is nothing like a game. Unexpected events constantly disrupt the plot. He sees a girl in colorful clothing and thinks she must be freed, but then discovers the true source of this confusion and Leon Praise. Just at that moment, the academy director intervenes and, addressing the crowd, announces that Xenon has done everything legally. He bought a slave girl and received official school permission for her to accompany him. The students are shocked and outraged. The director coldly tells Leon that he has no grounds for complaints, and Xenon folds his arms over his chest with a confident winner's smile. Thoughts involuntarily returned to Leon, that predictable, so-called hero of justice, especially when it came to women and children. At that moment, Shell Uranus appeared, clenching her fists and with a face blazing with anger. Nearby, Leon consulted with a classmate, asking if they could leave it like that or if they should use force to take Earth. He agonized over the laws. Here slavery was officially considered property, and forcibly taking a person from the owner's hands was not liberation but a crime. He knew well that taking her by force would mean robbery. Xenon looked at him and thought how typical of Leon to get involved in such a tricky fuss, wasting time and money. Then a cynical thought flashed through his mind. How much would Leon pay for her? How much it costs to buy her freedom? From his detached point of view, the gamer protagonist thought all RPG heroes are like that, they always choose the scenic detour. It amused him, but he admitted that the main hero should behave that way. Turning his attention back to the scene, Xenon sharply dismissed Leon get lost, then placed his hand on Urza's head and, firmly stating that she would not be sold for any money, declared her his important slave and subordinate. Finally he said, "See you in class," turned and left. Enraged by the refusal, Leon rushed forward, shouting that Xenon was a fool because he still understood nothing, grabbed him by the shoulder and sharply turned him around. He threw a punch, catching Xenon by surprise, but before the fist landed, a fierce scream sounded. Urza will not forgive anyone who dares to touch her master, and the attack in front of the crowd of witnesses turned out to be a foolish mistake that put Leon in a very disadvantageous position. An astonishing display of agility, she jumped high into the air. She swung a huge spiked club. Its size seemed impossible for such a small body. Leon and Xenon looked up, completely shocked by her sudden and brutal intervention. With a fierce roar, she brought the weapon down between them. The club with destructive force struck the stone pavement, shattering the ground and sending cracks spreading around. Leon jumped back, his face frozen in a mask of disbelief. She loomed over the crater, her red eyes blazing with protective fury, and she growled that she would not allow her master's enemies to escape, swearing to beat them all to death. She slammed down her huge spiked mace with a crash, growling that she would splatter his insides. Leon, his face pale with horror, raised his hand and begged to wait and calm down a talk. The sword barely withstood the pressure of her mace, and from the crowd of Shell Uranus students, a loud voice shouted at Leon to stop, insisting that he was not an enemy of the earth, and Leon, choked by the incredible pressure, shouted back that he just wanted to be freed from slavery, and Shell begged him to listen. But her eyes remained cold and unyielding. For her, there was no room for discussion. Her relentless advance raised a wave of panic among those present. The students scattered in horror. Leon turned and fled. Urza raced after him, shouting to wait, and Xenon stood watching this chaos as a drop of sweat ran down his temple. He grabbed his head in despair. It was no time to stand aside. He knew that the master's duty was to stop the rampaging assistant. With this determination, he rushed forward, shouting at Urza to wait. She looked back with a wild smile and declared that she would kill her master's enemies in an instant. He shouted again, demanding that she obey her master, but he knew it was most likely in vain. Once Urza entered a battle trance, she noticed nothing around her, and he could only watch as she rushed forward with an expression of pure ecstasy. Chaos among the students intensified. Panic screams filled the air as they rushed to flee, shouting for everyone to run before getting caught in crossfire and for someone to call the teacher. Then he realized there was no other way. He had to stop Urza himself. He could not allow his master to die in such a place, so, gathering his willpower, he roared, "Get ready, I." With a fierce scream, Urza swung the mace down toward Leon's chest, but a moment before the strike, Xenon's hands shot forward and grabbed the heavy weapon. The force of the blow stopped in place, shocking Urza and the spectators, who froze in silence. He did not release his grip, and a wave of energy surged through Leon's face, twisted in a silent scream of pain. Shock struck. Leon fell to his knees, his body convulsed spasmodically, and foam sprayed from his mouth. His sudden fall caused the students to shudder with horror. They could only stand and watch, unable to believe their eyes. Despite the observers, Xenon returned to Urza, who was still on alert, and decisively ordered her to stop, saying this would be the final blow. Nearby Shell Uranus shouted in confusion, addressing her master, "What is she doing here?" While Urza herself looked puzzled by such an order. He even addressed the stunned crowd, brushed everything off, and called it a pleasant misunderstanding, joked with a haughty smile about how humiliating it was for such a thing to happen in broad daylight in public, told Urza it was time to go, while the other students only muttered in surprise, and Aleph and Shell watched as this strange scene unfolded. Before leaving, he sincerely apologized one last time to those who were watching. On the ground, Leon lay completely broken, and it seemed his suffering was over. The main hero had finally been avenged. After the clash, two people in uniform carry Leon Pries on a stretcher, his body helpless, and nearby a worried student tells Uran. Leon suddenly became aggressive, but it happened because of a little girl, the companion of Baskerville, who fought back, and the student sums it up simply. The girl turned out to be stronger. The incident immediately became a cause for gossip among the students crowding near the academy gates. In the crowd, they whispered whether Leon had broken the rules, and one name echoed everywhere: Xena. Xenon was urgently summoned by the academy director, admitted that Leon was not blameless either, but sharply reproached Xenon for excessive self-defense and forbade him from causing more problems. When they were alone, Xenon poured out his anger on Urza, grabbed her face, and warned her never to bring her to the academy. Aginch willingly agreed, and he softened a little, told her to be careful, and confessed that he was also in pain. This is a stern warning. Xenon leads Urza into a huge, tiered lecture hall and sits among the other students. When he settles in, a cheerful student with shaved sides approaches him and cheerfully calls him Baskerville. While Xenon looks with a vacant gaze, he does not recognize the boy, who immediately reminds him that Xenon saved him during a gargoyle attack. The friendly gesture was noticed by Shell and Arit. In their seats, they whispered, recalling the incident, that Leon, although unpopular, was actually a good person who only tried to prevent Xenon from harming Urza. Meanwhile, that friendly student walked alongside Xenon and Urza and asked if he was bothering them, and Xenon mysteriously remarked that, although he understands the urge to put a collar on a cute girl, he considers it a crime. And he does not stop and cheerfully notes, "With such a handsome face, Xenon's constant scowl is a real mystery." Nearby, with a stone expression, Urza shines with joy. Since Xenon saved him, all his negative feelings towards the basketball family have disappeared, but his praise is interrupted by a girl with a high ponytail who squeals excitedly, calls Urs cute, and rushes to hug her. Other girls instantly gather, shower Ursa with attention, and want to pet her as if she were a tamed demon lord, which clearly irritates Xenon. Only one student leaned over and explained to Xenon that the girl Alice simply adores small animals and does not at all treat Urza as an inhuman being. Xenon's face softened a little from the accepted good intention, and when Urza realized he was compared to an animal, he opened his eyes wide in a funny shock. He pats Xenon on the shoulder and says that being liked by a girl is good, but for a woman to earn contempt is terrible, and this remark makes Xenon think. Propping his chin with his hand, he anxiously thinks that Urza was the root of the incident with Leon and that ultimately the responsibility for all this may fall on him. In the lecture hall, the teacher announces the start of the class, students settle in, and Alice happily waves to Urza. She blushes from the attention and asks to be let go. Outside the academy walls, a depressing silence reigned. Leon was absent again for another day because the curse that struck him turned out to be too strong, and the healing magic injection used to save him had to be very powerful. In the noisy cafeteria, Zenon savors his lunch, and a friendly classmate remarks that a week is a long time for recovery. Zenon mentally rejoices that, due to the absence of his loud master, school life has become quiet and peaceful. He notices Shell Uranos glaring fiercely at him from the other end of the room. Although she seems to want to talk, he has no intention of engaging in conversation, and her angry expression instantly melts into awkward embarrassment. Meanwhile, two other female students approach Urza, offering plates with pastries and eagerly ask if she wants to eat dessert with them, which surprises her greatly. Later, she eagerly eats a piece of meat and happily exclaims that it is incredibly tasty. Thanks to the unexpected popularity of Ursi, Xenon notices that his position in the class has also risen. More and more classmates willingly talk to him. The students crowd around her, offering more food and exclaiming how cute she is, like a hamster stuffing its cheeks. Urza, blushing, protests that she does not want to be treated like a child. Sun rays flood the majestic building of the academy. In the dining hall, they were talking about Leon again. One friendly student said that it was not surprising that he did not return if he was beaten so badly that he could no longer have children. It would be a terrible trauma for anyone. It was then that Leon Praise appeared, reproachfully pointed a finger and shouted that Xenon was a fool for stealing someone else's slave, and Xenon, listening, calmly sipped his drink and thought to himself that he had suspected as much. He was definitely the type whose sense of justice prevailed, a hot-headed hero who often acted on impulse without thinking. Xenon felt that Leon in front of him was now completely different from in the game. There, saving enslaved children was considered a commendable act worthy of a good person. But this is reality, not a game, and such rules made Leon a very troublesome person. In the world of manga or anime, such a hero might be considered attractive, but not here. He knew that reality was not a simple story. It could not be clearly divided into good and evil. There were too many shades of gray. The thought that such a hero would portray him as a villain made him insanely angry. Xenon decided that Leon was just too serious and clumsy. Sometimes it was easier to ignore such people and look away, and that is exactly how he thoughtfully bit into his food in the company of naturalists. Meanwhile, at another table, one of the female students noted that Leon might be an idiot but not a bad person. Next to him, Alice cheerfully offered her some of her food. Xenon heard this and silently agreed. He hoped that someday he and Leon could understand each other, because both were persistently moving toward the same goal, to defeat the demon lord. Sipping his drink, Urza, surrounded by a pile of empty plates, cheerfully declared that she was full, and Xenon quietly told her that it was time to go. Having eaten their fill, both set off down the long, sunlit corridor. When they were leaving, a conversation outside suddenly caught his attention, and he looked out the window. There, Leon and another guy were talking with Arit. Other students looked satisfied, and Leon was questioning Arit why it was impossible. They were trying to recruit her to their team. Another student was glowing with impatience and invited Eris to join, and Leon swore that they would definitely protect her, saying they would be on the front line, and as a healer she would be safe. He begged her to at least try going with them on the next expedition, but she hesitated to agree. Standing by the window, Xenon instantly recognized her, Arit Centria, the Saint of Centria from the game, the main heroine and the only one with the unique class of Restorer Sage. He wondered why Leon was so aggressively trying to recruit her just for some dungeon clearing, and nearby pulled his sleeve and asked what caught his attention. Watching, Aerith stood embarrassed. She understood what was happening. Leon and his companion came toward her, and Leon insisted that she wait. He explained that this was the decisive moment when she was to join his team, and she seemed to realize this, quietly gasping. He said with unwavering confidence that it was already decided she would join them, and his stern expression left no chance for objection as he insisted that she go with them. He took her by the hand and pulled her forward. At first Aerith was surprised and her cheeks gently flushed. Her gaze froze on him as he led her through the rain of petals. A faint smile played on her lips. From his place by the window, Xenon watched with a sly smile and thought about how deeply he was impressed by the opportunity to see this fated event with his own eyes. His self-satisfaction suddenly shattered, his eyes widened in disbelief. He grabbed the window frame because something went terribly and completely unexpectedly wrong. Through the window he saw Leon rushing down the corridor, leaving Aerith behind. Urza shouted anxiously, begging her master not to stand up so suddenly, and in Xenon's head an unbearable pain spun. She stood alone, a single tear rolling down her cheek. With a trembling voice she lamented that Leon was not here again, and the image of him flashed in her memory. He sat lonely and depressed. Friends gathered around her in the sunflower field, their faces clouded with anxiety. Someone asked what would happen to the event now. Another wondered if Farit agreed with this outcome, and then, turning to the invisible Xenon, a young man directly addressed him. "What should we do?" Rat Sentria bows her head and reluctantly agrees to go with them, but clarifies only this time. Non, accompanied by Leon Pries and another student, tells her not to complicate things and adds that they will meet after school to prepare for the dungeon, and her hand tightens on the bow on her uniform, a simple sign of alarm. When they leave, she looks back, her face is full of anxiety. It was completely unexpected. She was supposed to remain a minor character, not a heroine. She suspects that Xenon targeted her precisely because she is noble. His intentions are clearly evil. From the neighboring window, Leon watches their departure. His face is a mask of torment. He doesn't know what he can do. His comrades laugh and mock him because Xenon turned his precious hero to stone, and this thought pushes Leon into the abyss of despair. He realizes that Aerith will not become his partner. From the window, Xenon sees everything and mentally tells himself that this is a real trouble now, but so be it. He tore himself away from the window and moved down the sunny corridor, pressing his palm to his temple in irritation. Urza silently follows him. In the large lecture hall, students were cheerfully spending their free hour. One energetic young man waved to his friends and said he was going to the training ground, while others discussed whether to go to the Sage's Square. From his place, Xenon watches, his eyes narrowed in thought, while his two accomplices corner Aerith. Xeno clicked his tongue out of boredom, and his comrades decided to head to the lair of the King of Corpses, a cave dungeon known for being difficult for mages and priests and therefore supposedly suitable for beginners, where mainly golems dwell. Xeno thinks that with them nearby there is no risk of death, but he still has a bad feeling. He boiled over and suddenly jumped up, exclaiming that he was bored and everything annoyed him. Staying here would only spoil his mood, so he decided to go to the dungeon alone to clear his head. When he turns to leave, Urza lifts her gaze from behind the table and asks, "Master, where are we going now?" He looks back irritably, admits that going out is a hassle, but says they are heading to the place of trials of that sage. She tilts her head and asks why he didn't follow that woman earlier, and the question catches him off guard. He sharply replies, "Why should I do that?" He confirms her suspicion with a sinister smile, admitting that she is right, and Urza, with eyes wide open with curiosity, presses him and asks if he is worried because he looks like he is about to chase after them. In response, she insists that if he intends to pursue them, he must hurry. Xenon places his hand on her head and explains that he never decided to chase them, saying nothing will happen, and adds that Urza seems to see not only the fight, and this unexpectedly interests him. His thoughts drift to Leon's companions. He believes that their actions, although within the rules, are just a cunning way to monopolize the hunting grounds, a typical move of the main hero's party, and looking at their goal, the lair of the King of the Dead, he concludes that it is too simple there, so they won't need his help unless they are very unlucky. This definitively cements the main principle of the world he found himself in. The main heroine must be saved by the hero Leon, and the villain Xenon has nothing to do with it. He understands that intervening is a fatal mistake. If he saved Aerith and took her from the main hero, it would ruin how the story is supposed to unfold, and Leon's resolute face reappears before his eyes, reminding him who the real hero is here. The weight of this knowledge fell upon him, his face darkened. Ursula noticed his anxiety, raised a concerned look at him, and asked why he looked so troubled. Every question forces him to confront the source of his torment. He knows deep inside that he wants to help Aerith, but is unable to make that choice. The trauma of this game is doomed to haunt him, and there is a world where, if Xenon had defeated Aerith, Leon, consumed by hatred, would have risen as the Demon King. This memory fuels his dark desires. He imagines looking down on helpless Urza, fantasizes about her despair and about taking what belongs to Leon. While he struggles with these thoughts, Urza admits she doesn't understand his problems and advises the simple wisdom of her people: if an ogre is worried, let him just break something. She continues and simply lays out her way of solving problems. Stop worrying, find the enemy and smash him to pieces, think about it later. If you must worry, just find those who annoy you and crush them one by one. The brutal simplicity of her logic impresses everyone around, and a tear rolls from his eye as he, clutching his head, is stunned by how clearly she thinks compared to his tangled mind. Tension breaks and he bursts out laughing. He calls her people seized by battle madness and considers her advice useless but refreshingly absurd maxim. He gently patted Urza on the head. A new determination flashed in his eyes, and he thought that sometimes it's not bad at all to behave like a fool, to follow emotions without overthinking, like Leon, and there is no point, he decided, in worrying about the game's scenario or its flags. Urza, shining simply and enthusiastically, said yes. This decision arose from bitter insight. He did not know how his intervention would affect the heroine, but he knew for sure he was not helping out of mere kindness. He was trying to repay a debt to the plot, to give Leon a moment of triumph and avoid a death flag for Aritha's, but all this brought only torment, and he decided that worrying was enough. With this new philosophy, a wild surge of energy rushed through him. He ran in front of the academy, holding Urza's hand, raised his fist in the air and laughed. He was a villain, so he would do as he pleased. Save those he wanted and crush anyone who annoyed him, and Urza, jumping alongside, considered it a wonderfully simple plan. He declared it instantly. "Let's go," he ordered, pointing to their goal. Urza sharply raised her thumb as if she was under his command. Without a word, they rushed from the roof of the academy, beginning a rapid descent. Their target was far from the school's neat lawns, a dark, ominous cave on the outskirts of town. As they approached the entrance, the deep darkness inside stirred, and pairs of hungry, glowing eyes slowly blinked. Standing before the enormous gates, Xinan recognized the place, the lair of the king of the dead. With a sly smile, he ordered to move forward. Urza eagerly agreed, but their path was immediately blocked by a massive stone golem. In response, she raised a giant spiked mace, ready for battle. Without hesitation, she immediately took up her weapon and, with a fierce cry, brought the mace down on the lizard-like monster, roaring that it must be destroyed to ashes, and smashed it to pieces. Her fierce rage was not limited to one enemy. It turned into a whirlwind of destruction, breaking through an entire horde of creatures and shouting that she would kill them all and grind them to dust. Xinan watched with a satisfied smile, noting her ruthlessness, and for a blunt weapon, her mace was brutally effective against these stone-skinned creatures. When the last monster fell, Urza rushed to him, shining with pride. "Master, I did it," she exclaimed. Xinan praised her for a good job, and now they stood by the stairs leading deeper underground. He knew that Leon's squad had a considerable lead, but this was a dungeon with dozens of floors, so he warned Urza that the enemies from here would only become stronger, and she nodded, understanding. They began descending into the maw of the dungeon. As they walked, Xinan pondered their situation. They still could not catch up with Aith and the others. He admitted that that trio seemed to be managing quite independently. No sooner had he and Urza stepped into the dungeon than they encountered a battle already underway. A colossal stone bear with fur studded with sharp crystals roared in fury and loomed over a group of fighters, and Urza was momentarily stunned and caught her breath at its overwhelming power, realizing what a formidable creature it was. As the beast raged, Aith rushed forward, shouting to comrades to smash it. Leon stood ready, sword raised and glowing with prepared magic. From the shadows, Xinan watched attentively, silently ordering Leon to stop and not to use the spell he had activated, and a moment of hesitation flashed across Leon's face as the order reached him. Urza breathes heavily, standing over the twitching remains of the defeated stone creature. Not far away, Xinan calls her, a drop of sweat running down his face. She turns to him with a bright, carefree smile and says it was nothing special. He snorted, unimpressed. Since the time of the gargoyle incident, she had not fought alongside him and seemed to have forgotten even the simplest maneuvers. He sternly orders Urza to retreat, saying he will take the next battle. Her cheerful smile instantly fades, her eyes widen in shock, and she protests, shouting that she will not allow her master to go into danger alone. Ignoring her pleas, he turns to the new threat from the cave shadows, a huge, roaring, wolf-like beast, and brushing off Urza's protest, throws in her face, "You don't trust me. If you can't protect me, you are useless." The wolf with the crystal back lunges. He dodges to the side, full of confidence, seeing this as a perfect opportunity. The beast roars in despair, rising on its hind legs. The creature snapped its claws, but he easily parries and dodges the blows. A predatory smile spread across his face, and he says he has already learned how it attacks. The beast crouches, gathering strength. It immediately recognizes in this movement the harbinger of a powerful surge. With a roar, the monster lunged forward. Its giant jaws snapped shut where he had stood just a moment ago, but he had already turned aside and remained completely unharmed. Leaping high into the air, he brought down his sword from above with a powerful strike, shattering the crystalline growths on the monster's back. The beast stumbled, and its strength noticeably diminished. Squinting from intense concentration, he lets out a sharp cry and swings the blade again to deliver another devastating strike. He unleashes the final devastating barrage of strikes. His blade moves faster than the eye can catch. The body of the crystal wolf instantly shatters. Its crystal form scatters into a cloud of dark fragments. When the beast died, a look of pure delight blossomed on Earth's face, told Zenon that she was not worried at all and that he was truly strong and worthy to be her master. He explains to her, although it was a mid-level monster, his skills and knowledge of the game allowed him to deal with it alone without magic, but he warns the dungeon is still dangerous, so you must be on guard during encounters because everything can quickly get out of control. Without hesitation, they move forward. Their path leads to a cave strewn with the remains of countless monsters, a grim testament to the dangers of the dungeon. Urza excitedly raises the found object, resembling a ring. Their path opened into a huge crystal cave at the 8th floor, the bedroom of the King Tyrant. Urza stands ready in new lighter combat gear with a heavy spiked mace in her hands. Zenon warns that visibility is poor. Careful, and she confidently replies, "I will cut down everyone we find." Going further, Urza suddenly noticed something in the distance and let out a piercing scream. She found it. Zenon's gaze instantly turned to the disturbance. His face became stern. Her scream sharply draws their attention to the dark niche ahead, where several figures pressed close together can be seen. It turns out to be 3 adventurers. They instantly turn around and flee in horror, one shouting in disbelief, "Why is there a monster here?" Seeing their escape, Zenon points forward and growls something at them. His order is ignored, so he invokes the Shadowbind skill. Tentacles of darkness burst from the ground, fiercely grabbing the fleeing men and throwing them back onto the cave floor. He stands before the captured adventurer and demands to know why Baskerville is here. With icy determination, he demands an answer. Why did he flee? And more importantly, where is Erit Centria? The traveler stammers, saying he only descended into the dungeon for items and materials, did not expect such a powerful monster to appear, and assures he does not intend to abandon his companion, but he did. Zenon listens, clicks his tongue, irritated by this unexpected encounter. Tired of him, he orders Urza to move on, and she willingly obeys while the bound men panic, shouting for him to wait and free them from the magic, calling him a fool for leaving them. Leaving them to their fate, he and Urza advance deeper into the cave. The path is strewn with the corpses of monsters they have already killed, and he thinks that if these travelers are lucky, the binding spell will wear off before some other monster stumbles upon them. He considers abandoning companions a worthless act. Walking, he suddenly freezes, his eyes widen in shock as what lies in the room ahead opens before him. Before him rises a colossal crystalline golem, a giant of mithril, its massive form filling the entire cave. The colossal monster swings its clawed paw, but its attack is blocked by a hexagonal energy shield created by a young nun. While she fights, Zenon prepares the spell Dark Blade, noting that this creature is stronger than the others. She orders Urza to buy time and only dodge, not engage in direct combat. She lunges forward, shouting to draw the monster's attention. From the ground, the nun raises her eyes, unable to believe her sight, and recognizes him, Baskerville. The young woman pushes him to run, insisting she is not strong enough to defeat this monster, and Zenon looks down at her, irritably saying that in such a situation she should ask for help, not order him to flee, muttering that she has not changed at all, just like in the game. She sits on the cave floor, lost in thought. She believes that the true spirit of a saint is to sacrifice oneself for others, and feels that sacrificing her own life to save someone in need is the only meaning of her existence. She pulled Zenon by his clothes. Her breathing was ragged, begged him to run away, and said that he should not sacrifice himself for someone like her, asked him not to think about her or the girl and to leave them here to die. Zenon just looked down at her when she weakly asked if he was okay. Her self-sacrificial words only irritated him, and annoyed that she was still speaking that way, he grabbed her by the chin and pressed a small vial to her lips, ordering her to drink. After a brief choking, she thanked him but immediately suggested buying him time to escape. This caused sharp irritation in Zenon, and he decided at that moment that he would have to tame this foolish woman. He exploded with anger, his voice cutting. "Who is this insolent child?" He barked, demanding to know who would even listen to her. Aerith just froze, looked up at him shocked and silent, and somewhere in the distance a battle was raging when Zenon made a vow he would make her say the words, "Help me," and truly save Aerith. While the giant mithril roars behind, Zenon stands opposite Aerith, his voice tight with despair. "If this continues, we will all perish," and he demands to know why she does not allow him to be the one to die for her. He roars that her low self-esteem sounds as if her life has no value at all. Aerith only stammers, unable to respond. The root of her sacrificial nature stretches into the past. In childhood, bandits attacked her and her mother. To protect her daughter, Aerith's mother created a powerful barrier, a spell that slowly drained her own magical energy. Her powers slowly faded. She knew that if she continued, Aerith would die, but she could not bring herself to destroy the barrier even at the cost of her own life. The guards around tightened the circle, determined not to let anyone escape. A memory covers a field of graves where young Aerith weeps over her mother's grave. She survived at her mother's expense and since then has devalued her own life, living only for others, and Zenon's voice echoes this sorrow. He says she is wasting chances for happiness, although he himself should be the victim. At this moment, he tells her to stop being foolish, claiming that her devotion to God is just an excuse, a way to give up on herself because of her parents' death. He accuses her of thinking she must die for the grieving to ease herself and shouts at her, "Get a grip." He continues and says that since Leon is here, he is the one who should say this. His words hit Aerith and leave her noticeably shaken. In his head, an unshakable determination is born. He will not forgive a story where the heroine dies saving others. Since he transformed, he will not allow her to be unhappy for her sake. He will destroy every tragic ending, even if he has to become a villain or a hero. He grabs her and his eyes blaze with uncontrollable fire. He says that her past life was lived in vain, only for others. He forbids her from having the arrogant thought that someone so worthless could ever make anyone happy. The giant mithril holding Aerith captive mocks her, asks if she has any wishes, what she likes or hobbies, and says that if she does not want to die, she should pretend to be weak and beg for help. Tears rolled down her cheek as she remembered the past. She survived at the cost of her mother's life, and now in despair, she does not know whom to ask for rescue. At that moment, Zenon grabs her, his face close to hers, and he says that asking for help is a weakly privilege. Since she is weaker than him, he demands that she quickly bow her head and beg. Stunned, she folds her hands as if in prayer, tears still flowing, and finally she whispers, "Please help me." His reaction is pure theatrical delight. Zenon strikes a pose and exclaims that beautiful women look so pathetic when they cry and he wants to protect them. Aerith, stunned, calls him shameless. He brushes off her words, turns away with a triumphant smile, and suddenly a strange vision of confetti and cherubs appears, leaving Aerith with a sinister premonition. Returning to the fight, he ordered Aerith to drink the potion to restore magic, promised that together they would defeat that giant and that he needed her help. Aerith agreed, but noted the terrible power of the creature. It wounded everyone else without receiving a single scratch, and Zenon only smiled confidently and said he had a plan against cowards who would abandon a woman and run away. He looked at the battle and saw that Urza was barely coping even with her powerful demonic mace. She almost did no damage to the crystalline creature. The giant mithril stands unshakably, and Zenon mentally feels the same incredible hardness he remembers from the game. This only confirms his suspicion that before him is not an ordinary monster. Everyone knows the concept of a safe dungeon is a lie. Surprises can happen anytime, and in any dungeon, even a very familiar one, there is always a 0-1 chance to encounter a real horror, a monster whose power far exceeds the dungeon's own level. Such monsters often immediately have some special, deadly abilities upon appearance. Zenon, bruised and bloody, returns to Aerith and orders her to heal the half-human Urza, says he will start casting a spell, but Aerith interrupts him. Despair is written on her face. She insists that it is useless. Magic does not work on that monster. Ignoring her protests, Zenon snorted mockingly, confirming that he knew well the nature of the creature. He explained that it was precisely because of Mithril's extremely high magical resistance that magical attacks did not work, and then, with a fierce expression, ordered her to be silent and simply follow his commands. Meanwhile, another member of their group, a woman dressed as a healer named Nelt, directed her power. A glowing circle of runes flared around her as she cast a chain of enhancing spells. Exiled, Strength Up, Guard Up, Stamina Charge, and Rabbit Foot. The effect was immediate. One elf from their group felt a sudden surge of strength. The wound on her leg vanished in a flash of light, and she exclaimed with renewed energy that she was ready to continue the fight. Zenon reproachfully addressed the healer. Her job was to restore and support, not to stand on the front line and be a shield for others. Why was she rejecting her own powers? She looked back at him, her determination unshaken. Despite his words, she simply did not want to see anyone else suffer. He snorted disdainfully and sharply replied that if someone got wounded, her job was to heal them, and he emphasized once again that the healer's place was behind, to cover the fighters on the front line. After that, he again focused his attention on the mithril giant. Stepping into the center of the huge, intricate magical circle, he took advantage of the fact that the creature, with a fierce temper and weak defense, was the perfect target for the first kill bonus. The magic he wanted to use would simply not work under normal conditions. An image of a scientist explaining the unique structure of the world came to mind, not a level system, but a skill model. First you acquire a grimoire, learn spells, and then train mastery to master the skill. But the scientist, holding the grimoire in his hands, showed an important loophole. It is possible to learn even the most powerful magic regardless of mastery level, but he insisted without the necessary skill points, the spell simply would not work. He grimaced in a half-smile, electricity crackling around his hands. He admits that this system is annoying and creates problems, but that is exactly why it fascinates him. He states that there are two ways to defeat the gigant mithril. The first way, he says, is a direct physical attack. The squad must constantly dodge the creature's attacks and gradually wear down its enormous endurance. This is a battle of attrition, which many others have already lost. Their bodies now litter the battlefield around the Colossus. The second method is magic. He reveals that the common belief that there is magic that neutralizes mithril is a deception. In reality, if a creature receives enough magical hits, its mithril armor crumbles and beneath it is only a golem. He read this important detail in the guide, the very one that misled many other players. To exploit this weakness, he takes out a paid special item, a bottle of doping, sharply squeezes it with his fist and breaks it, absorbing its contents. The power of the vial bursts into him, temporarily raising his skills. Beneath his feet emerges a complex magic circle, and his companions, a healer and a warrior, watch with wide-open eyes in amazement. He directs the newly found power, focusing it in his open palm. Before him materializes a swirling vortex of pure dark energy, pulsating with immense power and reaching its deadly peak. When the whirlwind becomes unstable, he jumps into the air, loudly warns the elven warrior, Urza, retreat, and declares that in his current state he can now wield the most powerful dark magic. He casts a spell. In the air above the giant mithril, a huge, intricate magic circle grows, and he proudly proclaims that this magical abyss gate is a power that only he and the Demon King can command. The gates of the abyss opened. The colossal golem was engulfed by a dazzling sphere of light, pierced by twisting tentacles of dark energy, and the creature was trapped, its silent form distorted as if on a silent screen. Under the immense pressure of the spell, the crystalline armor of the mithril giant breaks and crumbles with a terrible crack. Pieces of its body fly off, exposing the dark mechanical frame beneath, and it begins to completely disintegrate. Its crystalline form could not withstand the power of the abyss, and the massive golem shattered. Its body broke into countless fragments under the irresistible force of the spell. When the last remnants of the monster disappeared, the elven warrior joyfully exclaimed that she did it, praising him as her master, and threw herself into his arms tenderly, while Xenon looked pale and exhausted, confirming that the conquest was complete. The non-healer, watching them, sank into her thoughts, and her mother's words flashed again in her memory. Someday she will meet her destined one and must give him everything. But Reverie was brought out of his reverie by Xenon's cry of pain. He complained that his whole body ached from the recoil of the doping drug. The non-healer, now standing nearby, sharply pulled him by the ears and scolded him it was his own fault for being so careless. Xenon squeaked, asking if she said something. She, stumbling, objected, turning away and blushing deeply. Skipping the word Aerith turned out to be a fatal mistake. This became clear a little later, and a new path began. A huge crystal cave stretches into the darkness, strewn with fragments of a great battle, broken swords and abandoned armor scattered on the ground, remnants of a fierce clash. Dungeon and Countermetal Conquest, a special item received for collected proof of victory, and he wondered, shouldn't there be someone here, like in a game, who would exchange it for something valuable, and does this world operate by the same rules? Having made a decision, he turns back and leaves the cave, closely followed by companions, an elf warrior and the one who does not heal, and he asks them if they are ready to return. They move on, but their path is blocked by a swirling wind vortex. Trapped inside are two students who scream the surname Xenon in horror Baskerville. He could no longer desperately beg him to release them. Xenon turned his back and snorted disdainfully, irritated, thinking of leaving them to their fate. Then the non-healer stepped forward, called him by name and asked if he really just used his own name in a curse, reminding him that she bought him to serve her, and questioning whether he was worth that price if he wouldn't even help. He turns to her with a threatening look, believing he abandoned his squadmates but defends his action. As a teacher at the academy, he must punish students and insists that his personal principles give no valid reason to meet them halfway. She decisively rebuts his arguments, insists that he should not dirty his hands for people like them, and begs him to stop tarnishing his own reputation. He freezes, catching her words, and realizes, if someone saw him handing classmates over to monsters, he would definitely become an outcast throughout the academy, and the friends he found might turn away. With a simple, sharp snap of his fingers, the powerful vortex instantly dissipates. Both students are forcefully thrown to the ground, gasping for air. Xenon turns to the stunned non-healer with a cruel smile and mockingly says that as a holy woman she should not have caused him such unnecessary pain. Her eyes widen in shock. She understands the hint and stammers, "Me." Meanwhile, the young horned girl Urza is dressed in new combat gear. A hood with a xenon glove or a striped cloak on her back, she accepts it and blushes a little. Full of energy, she exclaims that she is bored and ready to deal with a few enemies. The nun, embarrassed by the recent turn of events, stammers, and Xenon casually waved his hand, dismissing her anxiety. Urza stands nearby and looks up at the nun. She found determination within herself and with passionate confidence says that she does not intend to save the other students. Xenon is her protector, and she intends to defend him. For her, it is an honor, she insists, but at that very moment the monster strikes Urza and throws her aside. The statement hung in the air, and in the cave between them a tense silence fell. Meanwhile, Urza is already in the midst of things, cheerfully picking up coins and other loot while monsters are mercilessly dealt with around her. Xenon broke the silence, ironically noting the nun's unexpected audacity and asked when she appointed herself guardian, then turned away and called Urza to return. She immediately obeys, joyfully rushing back to him in the middle of the night. She proudly shows her bag already bursting with sparkling crystals and persistently asks her master to look at all the things she has collected. He praises her and gently strokes her head for a job well done. Urza glows with happiness, and the nun watches this tender moment with surprise. The task is completed. Xenon's voice sounded from the stone stairs leading out of the dungeon and asked if it was time to return home. He leads his companions, the nun and the warrior Urza, through the stone depths of the dungeon. When they emerge into the light, Urza, already in school uniform, peeks from behind a corner and watches them closely. As they walked, the nun suddenly pressed against his back, and he did not expect such close contact at all. The unexpected sensation pierced him, and his face twisted in pure shock. He blushed and stammered, asking her to step back a little, complaining that her breasts were pressing on his hand. She calmly says that as a healer without protection it would be difficult, therefore keeping a distance is unreasonable. Walking ahead of the stone stairs, he silently agrees, but her closeness presses on him so tight it seems almost sinful. He also reminds himself that he never allowed her to do everything as she pleased. She reminds him he himself told her to live as she wished, and now she is simply doing so, insisting that he answer for his words. He falls into despair, not understanding how it happened, and blames himself, thinking that this should have happened between the hero Leon and the sage Aerith, not him. He mistakenly took on the role of the hero. Suddenly changing the subject, she directly asks about him and recalls the last words of Aerith's mother, those she spoke before death, giving everything to the destined partner who was to become the hero's support, and the nun claims that Xenon behaves exactly as that woman described the hero. This revelation shocked him in his soul. He screams for her to stop. He insists that he cannot be a hero. He does not understand what kind of testament Aerith's mother could have left. He is sure it is a terrible misunderstanding. She calmly continues, saying that if he is not a hero now, maybe someday he will become one. Whether he becomes a hero or a villain depends only on his will, and then makes a stunning statement. He is a character doomed to bring the world to ruin. Her words leave him completely astonished. He clutches his head in his hands. He racks his brains, sure that he never consulted any unknown fortune teller about life. He pushed away the hand, but the one who does not heal just raised her eyes to him, and a light blush colored her cheeks. His eyes widened in shock when she did not retreat. Instead, she grabbed his leg with unexpected strength. Her face softened to calm devotion. She said that if he is a hero, she will become his guardian angel, and swore to dedicate her whole life to him, to be by his side as his wife in joy and sorrow, in sickness and health, that she would never change. She was the one he was destined to be with. He looked back, completely confused, and suddenly realized that such a dialogue had never been in the game. She pressed against his chest. Urza clung from the other side, and he tried to pull himself together, whispering to himself, "Calm down and don't think about this feeling." He could not believe this unexpected turn of events. The nun looked at him with adoration, and Urza announced that she was tired, Sighing, Zinon offered to carry her. Step by step they made their way through the deep cave dungeon. Urza comfortably settled on his shoulders, and nearby Arit was barely walking, so the nun picked her up and told her to feel safe. The nun's hand stretched out, pointing to the dazzling light at the end of the long stone corridor. She turned to Zenon and said they had cleared another dungeon. He nodded at her words, his gaze fixed on the exit. At that moment the nun pressed close to him, her stomach growling, and she quietly said she was hungry. He sighed quietly, burdened by two companions who were now clinging. He sits on the throne of fallen enemies and recalls his path. The thought of following a ready-made script amuses him. He refuses to become a mere target for capture, will not allow the world to fall, and will resolutely forge his own way forward. His thoughts fly to his comrades. Urza, who finally found friends, now goes through the dungeon with new confidence. This is proof of her growth. Not only Sheh also gained new powerful allies, 3 great heroines, among whom are the devoted non-healer, the wise Arit, and the formidable Nagisa. With these thoughts the group finally emerged from the dungeon, and when they stepped outside they were greeted by the bright light of dawn. Zenon suddenly realized it was already morning. Before them stand the majestic decorated gates of the academy, welcoming their return to civilization.